Chapter 648. After dinner, the group of No Name once again went through Wu Ming's portal and arrived at the North District's 54545 outer gate. Because the Fire Dragon birth ceremony was going to be held in 2 days, the night here was quite lively. The streets were filled with colorful lights, and the flow of people wasn't any worse than during the day. The gift competition that would only be held at night began in various shops, and the aroma of delicious food filled the entire outer gate of 54,545. Although the Fire Dragon birth ceremony hasn't started yet, it's already so lively. 16 Knights said thoughtfully. Although the Fire Dragon birth ceremony hadn't started yet, it was only a few days away. The nights before a large festival were usually very lively, so it wasn't wrong to be so lively a few days before the Fire Dragon birth ceremony. However, since Wu Ming and the others didn't look for a hotel, they chose to return to No Name through Wu Ming's portal. So No Name didn't see such a lively night scene at night. Seeing that everyone was eager to try, Wu Ming opened his mouth. Let's walk around and gather here in 2 hours. Don't get too excited and lose interest. The gift competition that's starting now is basically just an appetizer. The truly interesting gift competition will only appear during the Fire Dragon birth ceremony. With that, Wu Ming consciously looked at 16 Knights, Fein Yao, and Yao. I know. You're acting like an old mother. Jiu Fein Yao said casually. This made Wu Ming smile helplessly and shake his head. If it weren't for you problematic children, I wouldn't be like this. However, they were problematic children, and Jiu Fein Yao instantly found her target. Look, Yao, there seems to be a nice gift competition going on over there. Jiu Fein Yao pulled Haruai Hiroyuki's hand and pointed at the gift competition that was being held in a certain direction. Let's go and see. Haruai Hiroyuki showed a faint smile and nodded. Letitia, go with Flying Bird and the others. Wu Ming looked at the little maid beside him. After all, there was no guarantee that the Pied Piper would not attack Jiu Yuanfei again. Hence, it was safer to have Letitia, a 4-digit expert, follow Jiu Yuanfei. Other than that, there was one more thing, and that was to keep an eye on these 2 problem children. Although compared to 16 Knights, Jiu Yuki and Kasuga Yuta were weaker, their ability to cause trouble wasn't bad at all. In order to prevent the evening event from being ruined by a problematic child, Wu Ming felt that he had an obligation to help. Then, Wu Ming put his hand on Letitia's head and touched it. But don't just focus on them. You should enjoy yourself too. It's been hard on you to be a maid all this time. Letitia blushed and looked warm. Yes, master, I understand. After that, Letitia nodded with a smile and followed behind Kubo Asaka and Haruai Biao. Then I'll go shopping too. See you guys later. 16 Knights, who had already walked a few meters away, waved his hand. Mr. 16 Knights. Wait for me. Black Rabbit angrily chased after 16 Knights in the reverse direction. She didn't dare to let 16 Knights go shopping alone. If that happened, the probability of something happening would be 100%. I'll follow them and take a look. Ren was worried as he laughed awkwardly. Then, he followed the direction of 16 Knights. As for Lily, she wasn't like the others. As the leader of the logistics team, she had a lot of important things to do, so she didn't come. So, only Wu Ming was left. However, Wu Ming didn't want to go shopping. That was why he asked Letitia to follow Jiu Yuki and the others, and not himself. Because Wu Ming was going to visit Mandela in Salamandra tonight. Of course, it was a secret visit. With that in mind, Wu Ming looked in the direction of Salamandra's base. Salamandra's base. Mandela's office. Mandela was dealing with documents. Coincidentally, Shadora was also dealing with documents in her own office. Because of Shadora's immaturity, there were some documents that Shadora couldn't solve, or some documents that needed to infringe on the interests of the community. Mandela took them and dealt with them personally. Or rather, he acted as the bad guy. But after all, there were only a few such documents, so Mandela only needed to deal with them for a short while before he finished them. Closing the last document, Mandela put it aside. Sigh. Mandela lowered his head and sighed. He put his hands on the table and held his forehead. It could only be said that this scene was rare because Mandela had always been full of dignity in front of outsiders and Shadora. We have to get Shadora involved, Mandela said with a frown. If anyone were to see Mandela's frown now, they would probably be shocked. Wu Ming was one of the people who was surprised. I think your plan has a higher chance of failure. Who is it? The sudden voice made Mandela instantly pull out the sword that never left his side even when he was sleeping and looked around vigilantly. Don't be nervous, it's me. The sudden voice came from behind Mandela. Mandela quickly and cautiously turned his head and saw a young man with black hair and red eyes. Velo. Sir. Why are you visiting so late at night? Although he saw that it was an acquaintance, Mandela was even more uneasy. Because the person in front of him most likely knew about his plan, and he was someone he couldn't afford to offend, whether in terms of strength or influence. He had experienced the other party's strength, and the relationship between the other party and White Yaksha didn't seem like ordinary friends, which made him feel inferior. Don't be so nervous, Mandela. I'm not here to trouble you. Wu Ming put away an epic-level aura concealment item in Yggdrasil, went around Mandela's office, and sat on the chair in front of the desk. Mandela didn't say anything, but he put away his sword, because he knew that it made no difference to the other party whether he held the sword or not. Then, Mandela sat down in his chair, facing Wu Ming. Seeing that Mandela sat down but didn't speak, Wu Ming began to tease him. But I didn't expect you to be so considerate of Shadora. I thought you just wanted to cultivate a puppet leader. I never thought that way. Shadora, who has the perfect bloodline, is the rightful heir of Salamandra. Mandela slammed the table and stood up as if he was insulted. Wu Ming didn't care about Mandela's anger at all, and waved his hand casually. Whatever you say, I don't care at all. I only care about one thing, and that is our no name. Wu Ming's words calmed Mandela down. He knew very well that Wu Ming was here to negotiate with him. And the bargaining chip was that Wu Ming didn't expose him during the day. Then Wu Ming went straight to the point. I won't bully you. We, no name, will take most of the credit for dealing with the Demon King. Chapter 649. Then, Mandela's face instantly darkened. Impossible. Mandela's face darkened as he tried to control his irritable heart. He felt like he was being bullied. Let me put it this way. Even if you don't have this opportunity, with me around, no name will definitely not lack any opportunities. Wu Ming narrowed his eyes and looked at Mandela rather arrogantly. When Wu Ming said this, Mandela knew that his plan was almost completely exposed in Wu Ming's eyes. So, all Mandela could do now was accept it passively. Mandela had to admit that Wu Ming's words were indeed true. Even though no name seemed to be in a worse state than Salamandra, that was not the case at all. Although no name was at the bottom of the 7-digit hierarchy, Mandela thought that Wu Ming was probably at the 3-digit hierarchy, and this was a conservative estimate. In short, he would not be weaker than White Yaksha. With such an existence, why would no name be worried about not being able to rise? It's an opportunity that we don't need, but it's the most important opportunity for you. I guarantee that Shadora will be able to achieve what you imagine without any risk in this fire dragon's birth ceremony. In return, no name will have to take most of the credit. It's a very reasonable deal, isn't it? Although this opportunity was dispensable to no name, since there was a ready-made opportunity, why wouldn't Wu Ming seize it? All in all, Wu Ming would definitely take all the credit this time. Of course, Wu Ming would not go too far. He also gave Mandela a benefit that satisfied him, or rather it was just right. What Mandela needed was for Shadora to live up to her name as the ruler of the Northern District, so he attracted the Demon King. Wu Ming's bargaining chip was precisely this point, and it was a risk-free bargaining chip. This undoubtedly tempted Mandela. Then, Wu Ming continued. How can I believe you? Mandela asked. To put it nicely, do you still have a choice? Wu Ming smiled. Then, Wu Ming continued. Mandela really did not have a choice. Either Wu Ming would expose this matter to White Yaksha and Salamandra's plan would be ruined, or he would listen to Wu Ming. In any case, he might be able to achieve his goal. If it was the former, then the plan was doomed. If it was the latter, then there was still a chance. Seeing Mandela nodding thoughtfully, Wu Ming sneered. Let me say something unpleasant, Lord Mandela. Wu Ming emphasized the word Lord. Then, Wu Ming waved his hand, and 4 translucent grids surrounded Mandela. Immediately afterward, countless powerful weapons filled with ancient auras appeared in the square, each of them aimed at Mandela. I don't want you to be unable to see tomorrow's sun. The Manchala square formation appeared. Looking at these weapons aimed at him, Mandela's eyes widened, and he said in disbelief, These are all godhood weapons? Wu-Ming sat comfortably in his seat, looked at Mandela who stood up and was speechless, and said slowly, You're quite knowledgeable. Yes, these are all godhood weapons. Wu-Ming said as he reached out and touched a sword floating beside him. Although these godhood weapons are not the main body, their power is no different from the main body, and they can be used alone. However, Wu-Ming didn't want to prove this for Mandela, and Mandela, who had a little bit of strength, didn't need Wu-Ming to prove it for him. He clearly recognized that these weapons were indeed godhood weapons, which was the so-called godhood weapons. Mandela took a deep breath, then exhaled. So, you mean if I don't agree, you will kill me? If you want. Wu-Ming looked at Mandela with a smile. Wu-Ming was not a pushover. He could even take on the Supreme of Nasalic without hesitation. Killing a 5-figure community's second-in-command, Wu-Ming didn't have the slightest psychological burden. Just like that, Wu-Ming and Mandela didn't speak anymore. After a while, Mandela sighed. I hope you can keep your word. Mandela looked deeply at Wu-Ming, and he chose to compromise. Humph. At least I won't unilaterally abandon my allies. Wu-Ming responded sarcastically. Wu-Ming said as he put away Manchala square formation. In the entire Salamandra, only Shadora doesn't know about this, so, based on Mandela's words, it seemed that not only the higher-ups of Salamandra knew about this, but even the lower-level members seemed to know about it. Of course I know. With Shadora's personality, how could she agree to your approach? Wu-Ming looked at Mandela with an unpleasant expression. However, even so, he couldn't deny that his behavior this time was playing with fire, and it was the kind that burned everyone together. If it weren't for Shadora, Salamandra would no longer exist. There was no need to doubt that Wu-Ming had such strength. Then, Wu-Ming gave Mandela a cold look, then turned around and went to the window. You don't need to do anything, just wait quietly. Wu-Ming finished speaking, and his figure instantly disappeared from the window. Looking at the swinging window, Mandela sat down and closed his eyes. Sigh. On the street, Wu-Ming, who had blended into the crowd at some point, followed the flow of people and admired the surrounding scenery, but his thoughts were elsewhere. To be honest, after Wu-Ming knew the truth, he had the urge to kill Salamandra. Salamandra collectively held the Fire Dragon birth ceremony under the premise that the Demon King would attack the Fire Dragon birth ceremony. As for the invitation, no name, it was only after White Yaksha asked Salamandra and received a definite answer that he was invited. This meant that no name and the community of 54,545 Outer Sanctum had been placed in the position of Salamandra as a bargaining chip in the wager. There were only two kinds of people who could do this. One was that they would definitely win, and Salamandra obviously didn't have this kind of mentality. The second was that Salamandra didn't care about the safety of the bargaining chips they used as gambling chips. After all, if they lost, Salamandra would also be confiscated by the Demon King along with the bargaining chips. However, this was not an excuse for the other party to use no name as a chess piece. Imagine, if the community that came was not no name, but another community, then what would the result be if White Yaksha was defeated or trapped by the other party using a special method? They would all be wiped out. However, there were no ifs. This time, no name came. Wu-Ming admired Mandela's courage, daring to use him and his community as chess pieces. Salamandra. However, in Wu-Ming's opinion, Mandela was just tired of living. However, seeing that Wu-Ming had a good impression of Salamandra, and that she didn't know about it, Wu-Ming still let Salamandra go. However, the price was that the big credit this time was basically all taken into no name assist. Well, it can be considered as spending money to avoid disaster. Wu-Ming stopped thinking about this matter. At this time, a voice sounded. Ah, isn't this Villo? What a coincidence. Chapter 650. Wu-Ming looked towards the source of the voice, and saw a red dress. Flying bird. Wu-Ming was slightly surprised. That's right, it was Jiu Yufei. How did you get here? However, Jiu Yufei frowned in dissatisfaction at Wu-Ming's nonsensical words. What do you mean, how did I get here? Didn't you send us here using the teleportation gate? Are you having a fever? Jiao Yufei said as she reached out her hand towards Wu Ming's forehead. The naturally smooth and tender hand touched Wu Ming's forehead. Because of the temperature in the North District, this tender hand gave Wu Ming a cold feeling. It's not hot? Jiao Yufei said with a serious expression. Wu Ming waved his hand and slapped Jiao Yuasuka's hand away from his forehead. Please, how could I have a fever? Wu Ming smiled helplessly. The reason why Wu Ming was surprised when he saw Jiao Yufei was because he was interrupted while he was deep in thought, and realized that it was someone he knew. It was like a person who was in a light sleep suddenly being woken up by someone. Even if it was someone he knew, he would still be shocked. As for his spirit, Wu Ming would not release it if it was not necessary. Firstly, it would be tiring, and secondly, it would cause trouble. Furthermore, Wu Ming was deep in thought, so Jiao Yufei did not approach him. That's true. How could a spirit have a fever? Jiao Yufei nodded in realization. He did not expect Jiao Yufei to be so natural. He shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Speaking of which, aren't Letitia and the others with you? Why can't I see them? Wu Ming could sense Letitia's location, but it was not here. Although Letitia wasn't far from here, with Silent Land's instructions, Letitia shouldn't have left Jiao Yuanfei's side since she was taken care of by Silent Land. When Wu Ming asked this question, Jiao Yuan Flying Bird's body suddenly froze. After all, Letitia is also a girl. The festival is so interesting that it's inevitable that she would overlook it. Jiao Fei Niao put her hands together and smiled at Wu Ming. However, from Wu Ming's point of view, Koyoshi and Haruhibu Yaichi must have caused Letitia to be careless for a short period of time, which led to Letitia letting Koyoshi escape. From Wu Ming's point of view, the reason why he didn't see Haruhi Hataki was either because he was covering for Koyo Asaka, or because he had separated from Koyo Asaka when the latter was escaping. You guys sure are brave. Aren't you afraid of meeting the Pied Piper and those rats again? Wu Ming sighed. As expected, problem children were still problem children. After that, Wu Ming used his dependency authority to tell Letitia that Jiao Yuan Flying Bird was on his side. However, Wu Ming felt that Letitia's position was quickly moving towards his side. In other words, she was moving towards Jiao Yuan Flying Bird. I'm not afraid of that rat manipulator. If it wasn't for the fact that I couldn't use my powerful grace in the exhibition hall, I wouldn't have been in such a sorry state. Jiao Yuan Flying Bird was like a proud red fox as she raised her neck. However, Wu Ming didn't continue to talk to Jiao Yuan Flying Bird. Instead, he smiled at her. This made Jiao Yuan Flying Bird feel that something was wrong. Fei, bird, sister. A childish yet irritable voice suddenly came from behind Jiao Yuan Flying Bird. Jiao Yuan Flying Bird let out a cute squeal and immediately hid behind Wu Ming. The newcomer was naturally Letitia. Letitia, who had recovered 4 digits, was naturally not slow. In just a few seconds while Wu Ming and Jiao Yuan Flying Bird were talking, she arrived behind Jiao Yuan Flying Bird. Letitia, how are you? Jiao Yuan Flying Bird smiled awkwardly as she greeted her. I'm not good. Letitia opened her black shadow wings and floated in the air at the same level as Wu Ming and Jiao Yuan Flying Bird. She spoke calmly. Although she was a bit irritable after being tricked by a problem child again, when she saw her master, her anger disappeared. I'm the master's perfect maid. With this thought in mind, Letitia was no longer angry. Of course, even if she wasn't angry, she could still be a bit angry with her actions. Letitia moved Haruhi Toshi, who was hanging upside down behind her and tied up by a black shadow rope, to the front of her. At this moment, Miss Toshi's eyes were like mosquito coils. It was obvious that she had fainted. Haruhi Toshi's cat, Sanmao Cat, received the same treatment as Haruhi Toshi. The poor cat's eyes were also like mosquito coils. It looked like it couldn't hold on any longer. Toshi? Why are you Toshi? Jiao Yuan Flying Bird shouted subconsciously. Needless to say, Haruhi Toshi must have been affected by Letitia's high-speed movement while he was hanging upside down. But no matter what, Haruhi Toshi was still much stronger than normal people. So when Jiao Yuan Flying Bird called her name, she woke up a bit. I can still. Don't give up. Flying Bird. Then, Haruhi Toshi's body naturally drooped down and fainted again. Toshi? Jiao Yuan Flying Bird was shocked. Wu Ming didn't know what to say. Letitia, on the other hand, looked relieved. That's what you get for messing with me. Needless to say, Letitia must have done something to punish Hiroyuki Haruai for putting him in such a coma. Damn it! I will inherit Toshi's will. I won't give in. Joyuen Flying Bird was filled with righteous indignation. But, slap. It was the sound of a palm hitting a body. Ya dash. It was followed by Miss Joyuen Flying Bird's scream. Looking at Joyuen Flying Bird, who was blushing and holding her, but while glaring at him, Wu Ming narrowed his eyes. If you don't want to walk around, we can go back now. Joyuen Flying Bird admitted defeat. But, today's humiliation, you better remember it and return it 100 times? Joyuen Flying Bird said viciously. Wu Ming used his spiritual energy to look at the crowd around him and shook his head helplessly. Yes, yes, Mississippi. Let's go. Just like that, Wu Ming brought Letitia, Joyuen Flying Bird, and Haruai Toshi, who had woken up and was fine to walk around the night ritual. At the appointed time, the members of No Name gathered at the appointed place and returned to No Name together. Whether it was Joyuen Flying Bird or Haruai Toshi, the two problem children were tired from playing. They took a bath with Black Rabbit and the other girls and prepared to sleep. Wu Ming and the other men weren't that tired. After saying goodbye, they went to the library to read. This caused Wu Ming and 16 Knights to be alone. The Fire Dragon birth ritual is about to attack. Do you have any plans? 16 Knights suddenly asked. Chapter 651. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the No Name meeting room, 16 Knights looked at the night scenery and said to Wu Ming without turning his head, I do have a plan. I've already talked to Mandela about it. Wu Ming used the tea set to make tea for himself while replying to 16 Knights without turning his head. He's in the limelight again. I really want to teach that guy a lesson. 16 Knights laughed arrogantly. 16 Knights wasn't stupid. Compared to the other No Name members, he could be considered extremely smart. Going back in time, 16 Knights easily guessed why Wu Ming suggested going to the night ritual tonight. To be honest, even the night sacrifice on the eve of the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony wasn't that interesting. Otherwise, the three problem children wouldn't have agreed to come back. It was impossible for Wu Ming not to know this. So why did he suggest going to the night sacrifice? Naturally, it was to give orders to Mandela. Of course, in the entire No Name, only Wu Ming, who had the strength to crush them, could be called an order. If anyone else went, even 16 Knights, it could only be called a negotiation. It was very simple. It was because they didn't have the strength to completely crush Mandela. Although he was a little unwilling, 16 Knights understood that it was best for Wu Ming to go, so he didn't say or complain. Although Mandela is quite ruthless to others, he really cares about Shadora and Salamandra. Wu Ming poured the brewed tea into 2 cups and put down the teapot. What a coincidence. I'm also that kind of person. 16 Knights laughed. His smile was quite scary. Not only was Wu Ming protective, but 16 Knights was also protective. 16 Knights, who had already been recognized as a partner in community, had become the other party's chess piece. Naturally, 16 Knights was furious. Of course, this anger wouldn't be shown to 16 Knights. To put it simply, if something happened to the people in No Name this time, 16 Knights would destroy Salamandra, and it would be done with a smile on its face. Similarly, Wu Ming was also such a person, but Wu Ming was even more ruthless than 16 Knights. If it wasn't for Shadora and White Yiksha, Salamandra would have been destroyed by Wu Ming. Disregarding the residents of the entire 54545 outer sect, the community, and even the other outer sect members who came to participate in the competition, and placing everyone on the chessboard with the risk of death as a bargaining chip. In Wu Ming's opinion, such a community was completely unnecessary. Whether it was lowering the number of people in the community or giving up on the title of the Northern District's ruler, there were so many options, but they had to choose a risky one that would either succeed or die trying. Moreover, it was a method that would drag everyone down with them. This was enough for Wu Ming to personally deal with them. Wu Ming wasn't someone who liked to casually slaughter others, but in the face of such a community, Wu Ming had a clear conscience. However, it was precisely because Wu Ming wasn't someone who liked to casually slaughter others, and because he saw that Salamandra had a kind and immature leader with great potential, Wu Ming gave up on this idea. He believed that Shadora, who gradually took over the ownership of Salamandra from Mandela, would be able to manage this community well and wouldn't drag everyone down with her to die trying this time. Mandela has already compromised. What they've done this time has instead made a wedding dress for our no-name. Wu-Ming chuckled softly and took a sip of his tea. Oh, what do you mean? 16 Nights asked. Wu-Ming told 16 Nights about his conversation with Mandela. We took most of the credit? Does that mean that the Demon King also gave us full authority to deal with? 16 Nights' eyes lit up. Something like that. Wu-Ming nodded. Although Salamandra's approach was inhumane, since things had already come to this point, they couldn't waste it. Then, they would leave it to no name to accept. Well done, little brother. 16 Nights turned his head and made a great gesture to Wu-Ming. But don't be happy too early. If the other party can't trap White Yiksha and let him make a move, then we won't have a chance. After all, it was already so obvious. If White Yiksha didn't make any preparations, then it would be too embarrassing. Then I'll have to look forward to it. 16 Nights joked, then walked to Wu-Ming's side, picked up the cup of tea that Wu-Ming prepared for him, and drank it in one gulp. The tea is good. Time to sleep. 16 Nights waved his hand and left the conference room. Gotcha. The sound of the door closing meant that only Wu-Ming was left. Slowly sipping his tea, Wu-Ming looked out the window, admiring the night view. I wonder if those people will come to join in the fun. As for Pest's claim that no one told her about Wu-Ming, but she wanted to see Wu-Ming herself, Wu-Ming was skeptical. Wu-Ming felt that there must be a mysterious group of people behind this. The ceremony this time might not be as simple as I thought it would be. The night passed quietly. Time flew by quickly. 2 to 3 days later, the opening ceremony of the Fire Dragon Birth Festival was successfully held. Although it was an opening ceremony, as the host, Shadora only announced the start of the Fire Dragon Birth Festival. Due to the large number of people, Shadora merely spat out flaming words in the sky and used a special blessing to spread her words. She didn't summon anyone to explain it. The opening ceremony was peaceful, which made White Yiksha feel relieved. Usually, there were only 3 important parts in a festival: the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, and the grandest gift competition. Since the opening ceremony was fine, then the other party must be planning to attack during the grandest gift competition or the closing ceremony of the Fire Dragon Birth Festival. However, the other communities didn't know about this, so they were immersed in the joyous and grand festival. Although Salamandra was a little worried, they basically appeared at the various gift competitions as guards. Their serious expressions didn't let others see anything, and they just treated it as professionalism. As for no name, it could only be said that it and Salamandra were the polar opposite. Because Black Rabbit was going to be the judge, and Ren was only participating in some ordinary gift competitions, so the main combat power of no name was basically the 3 problem children. Because the 3 problem children frequently won with their strength, many people and even many communities remembered that the 3 of them were from the no name without a name. Wu-Ming, who was idling, sat in the audience seat and looked at Kazuhito Yayoi, who had entered the finals. Chapter 652. Wu-Ming was sitting on a special high platform with ordinary spectator seats on both sides. Wu-Ming was sitting next to Byakuya, and Letitia was standing behind him. Shadora was sitting above the 3 of them, and Mandela was standing next to her. There were some lizard or viper guards around the high platform. Looking at the guards and the people sitting here, it was obvious that this was the organizers' viewing platform. Why was Wu-Ming here? Whether it was as a member of no name who had joined forces with Salamandra, or based on his own strength, Wu-Ming was qualified to sit here. The reason why only Byakuya and Letitia were next to Wu-Ming was because the others were helping other people. Black Rabbit was refereeing and commentating at the gift competition in front of them. Ren also participated in some not-so-strong gift competitions. Lily, who came along, went to support Ren. Reverse 16 Nights and Jiu Yuan Fei Niao were also participating in other gift competitions. Don't doubt, the gift competition at the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony was beyond everyone's imagination. The 3 problem children had been participating in the gift competition for the past 2 days. Although the powerful, slacking Wu-Ming wasn't going to participate in the gift competition, it didn't mean that he didn't pay attention to it. Regarding the 3 problem children participating in the gift competition, Wu Ming could be said to have watched almost every match. Of course, that was under the condition that there was no conflict. Then, why did Wu Ming come to watch Haruai Hibiya's competition? It was because this was a special gift competition. This gift competition was the biggest type of gift competition at the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony, so Shadora would be there. This was also the reason why Black Rabbit would host this gift competition. The Demon King was likely to or would definitely attack when Shadora was present, so Wu Ming and Byakuya both appeared here. And Haruai Hibiya came to participate because Byakuya got rid of him. This gift competition was called the Showdown of the Creator. Only those who possessed a creation-type gift that could be used permanently could participate. And Haruai Hiroyuki happened to possess a creation-type gift that could be used permanently, the Catalogue of Life. Therefore, White Yaksha invited Haruai Hiroyuki to participate in this gift competition. Due to his interest and the fact that White Yaksha had gotten rid of him, Kasuga Biyao participated in the gift competition. He cleared all the obstacles and reached the semi-finals. Haruai Buyao's opponent was a huge stone man. Silent did not understand the rules of this gift competition, or rather, he did not want to understand. He knew that as long as he defeated his opponent, it would be fine. However, it was not difficult for Haruai Hiroyuki, whose enemy was the stone giant. The stone giant in front of Haruai Abe waved its huge arm and punched Haruai Abe. Then with a light jump, Haruai Hiroyuki flew into the air, or rather, stood in the air. After participating in White Yaksha's gift tournament, Haruai Hybe gained the friendship of a griffin and obtained the griffin's power. Thus, Haruai Hybe could walk on air. Boom! The stone giant's arm slammed into the ground, causing the ground to shake. However, there was no damage to the specially reinforced ground. Because of inertia, the stone giant couldn't quickly retract its fist from the ground. At this moment, the stone giant's body was slanted. However, Haruai Hiroyuki wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Or rather, he was waiting for this opportunity. Haruai Hiroyuki jumped lightly and instantly appeared behind the stone giant. Then, he gathered the power he obtained from the elephant into his feet and kicked the stone giant's back. Boom! Haruai Hiroyuki's boots made contact with the stone giant's back, creating a loud boom. Then, the stone giant fell forward and fell to the ground, unable to get up again. Then, Black Rabbit, who had been waiting for a long time, announced excitedly. The winner is no name, Haruai Hiroyuki. Oh! The whole audience screamed. The audience didn't care about the origin of the winner. They just wanted to see a good match. Haruai Hiroyuki, who defeated his opponent, won the audience's approval. Thus, they cheered for the winner, Haruai Hiroyuki. Wu Ming didn't have any doubts about Haruai Hiroyuki's victory. Although Haruai Hiroyuki wasn't as strong as Wu Ming in 16 Nights, it didn't mean that he was weak. Before coming to Hakata, Haruai Hiroyuki had a large number of animal abilities. After coming to Hakata, Haruai Hiroyuki also obtained the ability of phantom beasts. Haruai Hiroyuki's ability to fly was the most obvious example. Haruai Hiroyuki's effortless victory was already proof of his strength. What a beautiful attack! Byakuya, who was beside Wu Ming, praised. Miss Haruai Hiroyuki is indeed very strong. Shadora also agreed with Byakuya. Her tone wasn't flattery, but admiration from the bottom of her heart. Although Haruai Hiroyuki had a rather advanced gift, the Vital Catalogue, Haruai Hiroyuki was an ordinary person. He was even a sick person who couldn't get out of bed before receiving the Vital Catalogue. It wasn't that Haruai Hiroyuki relied on the Vital Catalogue to become strong, but Haruai Hiroyuki used the Vital Catalogue's ability. The Ancient Flying Bird's gift was also quite powerful, but due to lack of training, the Ancient Flying Bird's ability wasn't that strong. Even other people, or even other races stronger than humans, wouldn't be able to reach Haruai Hiroyuki's level if they didn't work hard with the Vital Catalogue. That was why Shadora praised Haruai Hiroyuki. Wu Ming was quite pleased with Shadora's praise. After all, Haruai Hiroyuki was a member of no name. However, he couldn't delay the important matters. All right, Your Highness Shadora, this is the end of the semi-finals. It's your turn to speak. Wu Ming said to Shadora. Wu Ming was right. This gift competition called Showdown of the Creator was the grandest gift competition in the Fire Dragon's Birth Festival. Shadora needed to speak for the semi-finals. Shadora nodded nervously, then took a deep breath and walked to the front of the stands. I'll take my leave first. Wu-Ming stood up when Shadora walked to the front and walked to the exit with Letitia. Although it wasn't in line with etiquette, for some reason, he didn't dare and couldn't refute Wu-Ming. However, even if he didn't speak, someone else spoke. That's a bit too much, kid. White Yaksha looked at Wu-Ming. No matter what, you're still a person of status. Can't you sit down and wait for her to finish? However, White Yaksha was just putting on an act. She didn't think that Wu-Ming, who was half a problem child, would listen. However, Wu-Ming was seriously thinking. That's true. Wu-Ming nodded. Then, Wu-Ming looked at Letitia. Letitia, you sit down in my place. Huh? Chapter 653. Hearing Wu-Ming's nonsensical words, Shadora, who stood at the front, almost knelt down in front of Wu-Ming. But she was still the leader of the Northern District, so Shadora still steadied herself and walked to the front. Then, under Byakuya's dumbfounded state, Wu-Ming left Letitia behind and slipped away. Letitia guessed her master's thoughts, sighed and helplessly sat in Wu-Ming's seat. Mandela closed his eyes and did not speak. Letitia was a 4-digit figure after all, so it was not impossible for her to replace Wu-Ming. Anyway, even if she said no, no one would listen. Fortunately, Byakuya and the others sat slightly behind, so no one saw the scene just now. Then, Shadora began to speak about the showdown of the Creator Finals. Wu-Ming naturally wouldn't listen. He could only say that Shadora was now a qualified leader. Although she couldn't speak as long as the principal, she could speak a little bit. Wu-Ming had a deep understanding of this during the opening ceremony of the Fire Dragon's birth. Therefore, Wu-Ming left in advance. Wu-Ming came to the exit of the contestants. Although there were guards from Salamandra, because they knew Wu-Ming, they didn't stop Wu-Ming. Just like that, Wu-Ming waited for Haruai Hibuya here. Because Shadora's speech was at the end of the semi-finals, she didn't say much, and the speech ended quickly. Haruai Hibuya walked out of the intersection with San Mao in his arms. Wu-Ming had been waiting for a long time. Vilo. Haruai Hibuya was a little surprised when he saw Wu-Ming. What, you didn't expect me to come? Wu-Ming asked with a chuckle. A little. After all, our relationship isn't good enough for you to pick me up alone, right? Haruai Hibe tilted his head and looked at Wu-Ming. In the relationship between the 3 problem children and Wu-Ming, the first thing to talk about was Wu-Ming and 16 Knights. Because of the Pact of Brawl, and the fact that both of them were wise men, the relationship between the two of them was quite good. Although it was not to the extent of being sworn brothers, it was much better than ordinary friends. And because Wu-Ming had indirectly solved the problem of Distant Flying Bird's blessing, the relationship between Distant Flying Bird and Wu-Ming was quite good. Only Haruhibe Masaaki and Wu-Ming were not as close to each other as Reverse 16 Knights and Jiu Fei Niao. The two of them were just partners in the same community. Besides, shouldn't Wu-Ming be with White Yaksha and Shadora? Also, where did Letitia go? Several doubts filled Haruhibe Masaaki's mind. Isn't it because the relationship isn't that good that you need to improve your relationship? Wu-Ming joked on a whim. However, Wu-Ming just didn't want to listen to a long story, so he slipped out in advance. However, Wu-Ming's words made Haruhibe Masaaki's face turn slightly red. His words had some lethality to Haruhibe Masaaki, who had never been in a relationship before. However, seeing his young mistress being teased, the 3-furred cat in Haruhibe Masaaki's arms began to bare its fangs and brandish its claws at Wu-Ming. Meow 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 meow. How dare you tease my young mistress? This old servant wants to duel with you. Although the 3-furred cat had seen Wu-Ming's pressure, it was about his young mistress, so this old servant spoke without hesitation. Hey, old man, your arms and legs are old. You should retire peacefully, Wu-Ming joked to the 3-furred cat. Although Wu-Ming wasn't a cat and didn't know cat or animal language, strictly speaking, Wu-Ming wasn't human. Even if he didn't understand the meaning of the 3-furred cat's words, Wu-Ming still guessed what the 3-furred cat was saying based on its behavior and the fact that they were both non-human species. 3-furred cat, don't mess around. Haruhibe Masaaki's expression returned to normal as he comforted the cat in his arms. She naturally knew that Wu-Ming was joking, but because everyone was busy, she was already very happy to have a partner pick her up after her competition. No Name had a high status in Haruhibe Masaaki's heart. Even if he didn't have much interaction with his partners, Haruhi Masaaki would still have a good attitude. Do you want to go together? Haruhi Masaaki looked at Wuming. Of course. Wuming shrugged. Otherwise, why would Wuming wait for Haruhi Masaaki? Wuming Masaaki and Haruhi Masaaki walked side by side on the road to Salamandra. Although they could use Wuming's portal to return to No Name at night, it was still somewhat inconvenient. Therefore, when the fire dragon was born, Shadora prepared a room for No Name and the others in Salamandra. As for Lily, although she said that she still had work to do, this was a rare event. She wasn't invited by Wuming Masaaki and the others. Instead, she was rejected by the other children in the logistics department. Leave it to us. This was the children's promise to Lily, which almost made her cry. In order not to disappoint her companions, Lily followed. However, Wuming Masaaki would still return to No Name every night to check. After all, No Name only had the magic puppets that didn't have life and consciousness. It was inevitable that he would feel uneasy. However, every time Wuming Masaaki returned to No Name to check, No Name was well managed by the children. Thinking of this, Wuming Masaaki couldn't help but smile. Can I ask you a question? Seeing Wuming Masaaki's smile, Masaaki suddenly asked. Of course, but as a price, I also want to ask you a question later. Wuming Masaaki paused for a moment, then proposed an exchange. Sure. Haruhi Hibu nodded, then asked a question. Villo, aren't you afraid of the Demon King? Masaaki asked calmly. Through past conversations, Masaaki knew that Wuming Masaaki had never seen or met a Demon King in this world. Therefore, it seemed reasonable for her to ask such a question. However, in Wuming Masaaki's eyes, this was just Masaaki's worry. That's right, worry. Although Masaaki was also interested in the Demon King, it would be a lie to say that she wasn't worried. Whether it was Masaaki or Jiyuki Masaaki, these two problem children's problem level was much weaker than 16 Knights Reverse. For example, although Jiyuki Masaaki and Masaaki seemed to be interested in the Demon King's attack, they weren't as excited and expectant as 16 Knights Reverse. They were slightly worried. After all, I've encountered many powerful enemies who weren't weaker than me, so I'm not afraid. Wuming Masaaki replied. However, I still have the power to protect my companions. Wuming Masaaki looked confidently at Masaaki. Seeing Wuming Masaaki's confident smile, she, who had experienced Wuming's power, couldn't help but feel relieved. However, the bitterness in her eyes didn't escape Wuming Masaaki's eyes. What about you, Yao? Do you have something on your mind? Wuming could tell that Yao had something on his mind. Facing Wuming's question, Haruhi Kiba pondered for a moment before answering. Am I too weak? Chapter 654. Too weak. Wuming repeated Haruhi words. Aha, I'm wondering if I'm too weak. Haruhi nodded, indicating that Wuming did not mishear. Why do you think so? Wuming did not stop because of Haruhi words as he asked while walking. The four of us came to this world together. Let's not talk about you for now. 16th Knights has the power to fight against you, and Flying Bird has also found her own path with your help. Becoming stronger is only a matter of time. It seems that I will soon become the weakest person here. That's only about, right? Wuming asked. Let's not talk about 16 Knights. Fei Niao hasn't found a suitable gift for her ability development. It's not good to define it so early. Then, Wuming reached out his hand and hit Haruhi little head. It hurts. Haruhi held the three-furred cat with one hand and used the other hand to cover the place where Wuming hit her head. You haven't been completely surpassed. You just have some momentum. Why are you so unconfident, little girl? Wuming said in a grandfatherly tone. Since there's momentum, then I'm destined to be the weakest. Haruhi pouted unhappily. In my era, everyone was constantly chasing after others. No one would relax after surpassing others. Instead, they would work harder after surpassing others. This was the so-called one step ahead. However, Wuming did not agree with this. Then let me ask you, Yaichi, will you always be ahead of others if you're ahead of others? No, Haruhibu Yaichi answered. However, he was right. There was nothing absolute in the world. But it's difficult to surpass others. This was the realization of the future Haruhibu Yaichi. That may be the case in your era, but don't forget, this is the box court. Wu Ming's words made Haruhibu Yaichi stop in his tracks. What kind of existence was the box court? There were gods, demons, illusory beasts, and everything else. It was a place where all miracles existed. If you don't have the confidence to overtake them in a place like this, then I believe your father won't be able to take it either. Wu Ming also stopped and looked at Haruhi Buyeichi. Haruhi Buyeichi was stunned. She was bound by the ideas of her era, which were old ideas to Hakata. Now she was breaking free. Looking at the stunned Haruhi Hiroyuki, Wu Ming decided to work harder. Well then Yao, let's talk about another problem. Haruhi Hibu finally reacted and looked at Wu Ming in confusion. I heard from Black Rabbit and the others that you came from a future more advanced than 16 Nights era, right? Haruhi Hiroyuki nodded. This was not a secret. Because it had been a long time since a girl of the same age as Black Bunny appeared in the community, as if they had found something in common, Black Bunny would drag Haruhi Hiroyuki and Gio Asuka together to have a tea party when she was free to deepen the girls' relationship. Of course, sometimes Letitia would be dragged in as well. The news that Haruhi Hiroyuki came from the future was accidentally revealed by Black Rabbit when they were in the community. Gio Asuka came from the era just after World War II, and 16 Nights is from the 21st century. As for you, you come from a future more advanced than 16 Nights era. This was the news that Wu Ming had accidentally heard. This explained why Gio Asuka was so conservative. They are both chosen children of their respective eras, Haruhi Hiroyuki said with relief. Indeed, whether it was Gio Asuka from the era just after World War II or 16 Nights from the 21st century, their respective abilities were especially advantageous for their eras. However, in Haruhi Hiroyuki's future, Haruhi Hiroyuki's abilities were not so magical. Flying in the sky was possible with the support of technology. Great strength was possible with the support of technology. Superhuman speed was possible with the support of technology. Even lifespan was possible with the support of technology. Therefore, Haruhi Hiroyuki, who could obtain the abilities of animals, was not like a chosen child in her own era. In my era, I was just an ordinary person who endured the torment of illness. If it wasn't for the gift that my father gave me, I'm afraid I would still be lying in bed. Haruhi Hiroyuki said softly as he picked up the wooden carving on his neck. Hiroyuki, don't underestimate the gift that your father gave you. Wu Ming shook his head. You should know that this thing can turn into a crazy chimera if it's not used properly. Although Wu Ming didn't know about the genome tree, White Yaksha did. White Yaksha said that people who once had part of the genome tree all became chimeras in the end. Haruhi Hiroyuki's gift was the complete version of the genome tree, but Haruhi Hiroyuki didn't show any signs of becoming a chimera. You, who can freely use this power without suffering any backlash, are not much worse than 16 Nights and Flying Bird, the two chosen children in your eyes. Perhaps the reason why Haruhi Hiroyuki didn't suffer any backlash was because he only obtained the abilities of ordinary animals. But who knew if Haruhi Hiroyuki was a talent that was buried in her era? And Wu Ming felt that the person who gave Haruhi Hiroyuki this gift, Haruhi Hiroyuki's father, would never harm his daughter, Haruhi Hiroyuki. Perhaps it was because Haruhi Hiroyuki's father thought that his daughter could control and master this power. So he gave this powerful and secret power to Haruhi Hiroyuki. This gift is the highest level of human gift. How can it only have the effect of receiving the abilities of animals, mythical beasts, and phantasmal beasts? Wu Ming smiled. You're saying that the wooden carving that my father gave me has other abilities? Haruhi Hiroyuki blinked and looked at the wooden carving in his hand. I only know that this wooden carving isn't simple. You'll have to explore the rest yourself. Wu Ming smiled and shrugged. The reason why 16 Nights is strong is because he doesn't have much room to grow. At least compared to you, he doesn't have much left. Wu Ming joked. And Jiu Yuki hasn't surpassed you yet. Before she does, why don't you surpass her first? Even so, let's not talk about the abilities that I haven't discovered yet. Currently, I can only obtain their abilities by making friends. Haruhi Hiroyuki had made friends with almost all the ordinary animals, so their abilities were naturally obtained by him. Then, the only targets left were phantasmal beasts, mythical beasts, and the like. But even in Hakata, how could it be so easy to meet phantasmal beasts and mythical beasts? It was thanks to Byakuya that he was able to make friends with Griffin. Wuming smiled at Haruai Hiroyuki's question and then said, "Let me ask you." "Then let me ask you, Yao. After this heart-to-heart talk, are we friends?" Haruai Hiroyuki nodded subconsciously, but she suddenly froze. Seeing the stunned Haruai Hiroyuki, Wuming smiled. "I'll help you collect information about your opponent." Wuming waved his hand and disappeared from Haruai Hiroyuki's sight. Haruai Hiroyuki, who was left holding the three-furred cat, stood on the street and looked at his hands. "Friend." Chapter 655. The finals of the Showdown of the Creator was not held immediately the next day. It was set to be held 5 days later. After all, it was the grandest and most lively gift competition of the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony. How could it end in a hurry? It naturally had to be delayed for a few days. In the next few days, because Shadora had to attend some gift competitions, Wuming and White Yaksha had been accompanying her. Ranhi Lily also participated in a few gift competitions. After receiving a lot of rewards, she stopped participating in the gift competitions and accompanied Shadora to attend the gift competitions like Wuming. Although it was said that Ranhi Lily participated in the gift competitions, it was basically Ran who won all of them by himself. Ran was indeed very weak, but that was in the past. Ran was now very strong. Ran had a special gift called Elf Servant. Its function was to summon spirit races that had formed a subordinate relationship with him, including star spirits, elves, and demons, and order them around. This gift didn't seem to be anything special, because even without this gift, one could still sign a contract with others and become a contractor and a contractor. However, this gift wasn't as simple as it seemed. It was rather special. Under normal circumstances, if the controlled person was stronger than the master he contracted, there would be a problem. Either the controlled person would break free from the master's restraints and become a free person, or the controlled person's original strength would be reduced and suppressed. For example, the former leader of Perseus, Luos, who had the demon star spirit Argel. The demon star spirit Argel was a powerful star spirit comparable to White Yaksha. Because of the inheritance of mythological history, he was forced to become a servant of Perseus. However, because Perseus couldn't completely control Argel, he imposed shackles on him and reduced Argel's ability. That was how he was able to control Argel. As a result, Argel lost himself and became a servant that completely served the leader of Perseus. It was even worse in Luo's generation because Luo's strength was inferior to the previous leaders of Perseus. He even reduced the 5-digit number of Perseus to 6 digits because of his lack of progress. The useless Luz could no longer control Argel, so he added a large number of shackles to Argel's body, greatly reducing his abilities. When Wuming took Argel from Luos, he couldn't help but feel sorry for Argel. Due to various shackles, Argel's strength had dropped to the edge of 5 digits, and was now approaching 6 digits. If Argel fought 16 knights in his current state, 16 knights would be able to defeat him in less than 3 moves. This was the tragic end of a slave that was stronger than the slave, especially when the slave was rather vile. Now it was time to talk about the gift of benevolence, the Elven Servant. This gift was that no matter how high the master's spiritual lattice was, he could completely dominate the other party. This was a special gift that existed in the bloodline of the Russell family after the Russell family received Solomon's gift. If he handed Argel over to Ren would be able to completely remove the seal on Argel and allow him to unleash his full potential. He would also be able to suppress Argel and prevent him from betraying him. In fact, that was what Wuming did. The powerful astral spirit, Argel, who could petrify a planet and unleash its full power, had become Ren's slave. At first, Ren was unwilling to accept it no matter what. However, under Wu Ming's persuasion, Ren still refused to accept it. As a last resort, Wu Ming set up a gift competition for Ren, which allowed Ren to obtain Argel. Of course, Wu Ming did not show any mercy to Ren, because mercy was an insult at this time. Therefore, Wu Ming designed a gift competition that did not exceed Ren's limits based on his strength. Ren also completed Wu Ming's gift competition with outstanding results. After obtaining Argel, Ren's strength also rose from the bottom of no name to the top of no name. After all, regardless of whether the slave was alive or dead, it was considered a personal gift. Just like Letitia, although she was a 4-digit powerhouse, she was also Wu Ming's slave. In other words, she was Wu Ming's personal gift. In short, no name did not waste Perseus at all. If it was useful, it kept it for itself, and if it was useless, it sold it. Perseus could be said to have completely unleashed its final brilliance. As for Luos and the others from Perseus, Wu Ming was very merciful and did not sell them. Instead, he left them to fend for themselves. After provoking no name, they still wanted to live well? Not selling them was already considered merciful. To be honest, if it was not for Wu Ming wanting to maintain his amiable image in no name, how could he not remove the root of the problem? However, not being ruthless allowed Wu Ming's reputation in no name to increase by quite a bit. Wu Ming's vague position as the leader of no name was the best proof. In name, Ran was the leader, but in some important matters, Ran would seek Wu Ming's opinion. Because 16th Knights was not as strong as Wu Ming, he often gave the limelight to Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming really did not want to be the leader, so Wu Ming chose to avoid certain matters. Just like when Haruhito Hiroyuki won the Creators Showdown finals, Wu Ming ran away when Shadora was speaking. Only when Wu Ming was not there, Ren would truly take on the responsibility of being the leader. After all, with the Devil Star spirit, Ren was not weaker than anyone in no name. However, because Ren did not use Argel, in the eyes of outsiders, he was still the weak Ren. Therefore, Ren chose to participate in some of the less powerful gift competitions. In order to highlight Ren's existence, Wu Ming did not appear in the VIP seats. However, Wu Ming was still there. Because if nothing unexpected happened, today would be the day of the demon's attack. As if she had decided to appear at the end, the Demon King, Pest, did not appear. 5 days passed peacefully during the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony. On this day, the gift competition that Shadora needed to participate in was the Creators Showdown finals. This was also the last gift competition that Shadora needed to participate in. If Pest did not appear, she would completely miss the opportunity. White Yaksha was very vigilant, and Wu Ming was also vigilant in the surroundings. Even Reverse 16th Knights and Distant Flying Bird did not participate in other gift competitions on this day. Instead, they chose to sit together with White Yaksha and Wu Ming in the VIP seats with Shadora. In the contestant passage, Wu Ming and Haruhito Hiroyuki gave their final instructions. Then, Wu Ming took San Mao from Hiroyuki's hands. "I've told you all the information about your opponent. Don't disappoint me, Hiroyuki." Hiroyuki nodded with incomparable confidence. "Yes, I will definitely win, my friend." Chapter 656. Wu Ming watched as Haruai Toshiaki entered the arena alone. The rules of the Showdown of the Creators clearly stated that the participants were allowed to bring one assistant with them. They could only bring one assistant. Of course, it did not state that they had to bring one assistant with them. They could also choose not to. It was quite humane, was it not? Naturally, Haruai Toshiaki would choose the latter. You want to ask why? Naturally, it was because she had obtained the help of her new friend. Moreover, it was not a small help. After Haruai Toshiaki entered the arena, Wu Ming did not go to the spectator stands or the special seats near White Yaksha to watch the match. That was because Wu Ming already knew the outcome of the match. After obtaining the help of Wu Ming, Haruai Toshiaki's chances of winning were at least 80 to 90%, if not 100%. After all, regardless of whether it was Wu Ming's abilities, they were all very powerful. Hence, Wu Ming was not worried about Haruai Toshiaki at all. However, Wu Ming would not stay here and do nothing. Today was the biggest match of the Fire Dragon's Birth Festival, the Showdown of the Creators. During the match, or rather, at the end of the match, the invading Devil Lord, Pest, would definitely come. Hence, Wu Ming needed to make some preparations. Wu Ming did not think so. He also did not believe that only Pest's group would come to attack the Fire Dragon's Birth Festival. The group that wanted to buy Letitia would most likely come as well. As for why? One simple word, intuition. Hence, Wu Ming needed to make some preparations. "Let's walk around for a bit," said Wu Ming. He placed the 3-furred cat on the ground and had it wait obediently. As a cat with high intelligence, the three-furred cat would naturally not run around. The three-furred cat consciously ran to the entrance where Haruhi Toshiaki had entered the arena. It watched Haruhi Toshiaki's match. This cat. Wuming could not help but laugh as he shook his head. Then, Wuming opened a teleportation door and walked in. Of course, Wuming wasn't just strolling around. He was making preparations. Wuming repeatedly went to a few famous scenic spots in the outer gate of 54,545. Wearing the hidden helmet of Hades that he had obtained from Perseus, Wuming opened his mouth and muttered something. Wuming's hands were not idle either. He was making gestures in the air with one hand. Wuming uttered a series of incantations that sounded like the whispers of a demon. Mysterious runes emerged from Wuming's fingers one after another like elves. In just a short while, Wuming had prepared everything he needed to arrange. At this moment, Wuming suddenly felt a gaze. This gaze came from the red boundary wall. Wuming's head instantly turned towards the direction of the peeping gaze. Wuming focused his gaze and saw a petite figure standing at the highest point of the boundary wall. That person was precisely Pest. As expected, it's you, Pest. Wuming's mouth moved. He believed that with Pest's eyesight, she would be able to see and understand Wuming's lips. After Wuming finished speaking, Pest immediately concealed herself. This was the best proof. Coming, Wuming said calmly. Then, a black-purple ripple engulfed Wuming. Then, a piece of black parchment floated down. On the other side, in the competition grounds of the Showdown of the Masters of Creation, countless pieces of black parchment fell down from the sky like raindrops. The entire competition grounds were covered in an ominous black color. The people held the pieces of black parchment in their hands. Their eyes were filled with disbelief and their hands were trembling slightly. Then, as if a barrel of gunpowder had been ignited, the entire spectator stands exploded. The spectators began to flee frantically. In the spectator stands of the competition grounds, the spectators who were originally filled with enthusiasm because of the fire dragon's birth ceremony only had one thought left: flee. They were like ants on a hot pan. Panicked shouts resounded throughout the competition grounds. Although the shouts were chaotic, it wasn't hard to tell what they were shouting. The Demon King had arrived. Almost everyone who was fleeing frantically was shouting this sentence. There were also a few negative sentences like, "Run! We're dead meat," and so on. However, there were still people who didn't panic. For example, Salamandra, who already knew that the Demon King would come. "Hurry! Immediately calm the crowd at the exit and calm them down." Mandela sternly commanded the soldiers beside him. They began to carry out emergency rescue to alleviate the fear brought about by the Demon King. Shadora wasn't idle either. "Everyone, don't panic." Shadora circulated the air in her chest. Her voice was very loud and clear as it traveled into everyone's ears. However, it wasn't that easy to suppress a panicked horse. Although some of the spectators had already begun to calm down, the majority of them were extremely panicked. They didn't listen to Shadora's words at all. Only a more majestic and terrifying voice could make them stop. "All of you, stop!" Like a dragon's roar, the moment this sentence was spoken, all the panicked and calm people stopped in their tracks. However, each of their bodies involuntarily trembled slightly, indicating that they were forced to stop by the pressure of a higher species. Immediately after, a figure appeared in the sky. Everyone looked at the figure. His golden vertical pupils undoubtedly indicated that this was the owner of the voice that terrified them. He was an existence of a higher level than any of them. This figure was undoubtedly Wuming. Then, Wuming nodded to Shadora, who was standing on the high platform. Wuming, who came here through the portal, saw Shadora's predicament, so he helped her. Shadora nodded and smiled gratefully at Wuming, then spoke to the crowd. "Please evacuate in an orderly manner according to Salamandra's arrangements." The spectators who had already calmed down didn't have any intention of resisting. It was always right to follow the officials at this time. Salamandra began to evacuate the spectators. Seeing that it was about time, Wuming retracted his pressure. His golden vertical pupils turned into ruby pupils. Then, Wuming flew toward Haruhi Hibakushi, who was on the stage. Ignoring the effect of the Demon King's attack, the pale ghost girl next to Haruhi Hibakushi looked depressed. The match was over, and it seemed like Haruhi Hibakushi had won. After landing beside Haruai Hibakushi, Wuming looked at Haruai Hibakushi and wanted to say something, but something happened on Shadora's side. The high platform where Shadora and the others were on cracked, and a figure suddenly flew out while laughing maniacally. Needless to say, it was reverse 16 Knights. Furthermore, seeing that 16 Knights was flying in the direction of the realm wall, it was likely that he had also found the Demon King's current location. This kid. Wuming shook his head helplessly. Choosing to ignore him, Wuming looked at Haruai Hibakushi again. Hibakushi, congratulations on winning this match. Looking at Wuming's gentle smile and listening to Wuming's words of blessing, Haruai Hibakushi smiled slightly and nodded. Aha, thank you, my friend. However, Haruai Hibakushi's opponent wasn't happy. I say, what are you two doing? The Demon King is attacking now. How can you all be so calm in greeting? The pale-faced girl who looked like a ghost shouted helplessly and with slight dissatisfaction. Because the girl had just experienced Wuming's pressure, she was a little scared of Wuming, so she was a little cautious when she spoke, which seemed a little out of place. At this time, a creature with a pumpkin head floating in the air like a ghost holding a lantern next to the girl spoke. Yaha, being calm in the face of danger is the style of a strong person. Sasha. Chapter 657. Although this big pumpkin was right, the reason why Wuming and Haruai Hibakushi could greet each other so calmly was actually just because the two of them had a problem child attribute. Of course, Wuming certainly couldn't say that, otherwise, the pressure he showed just now would be burned away. I haven't asked, who are you two? Wuming coughed and changed the topic. Willow, Sama, I am Aisha Ignatius of Willow's Wisp. This is the gift of our Willow's Wisp masterpiece, Jack with the Lantern. The girl named Aisha politely and respectfully answered Wuming. It really is Jack the Pumpkin Monster. Wuming couldn't help but look at the big pumpkin twice. If it was seen by Joyuen Asuka, the pumpkin monster that appeared on Halloween would probably make Miss Joyuen Asuka very excited. Yaha, you can call me Jack Willow-sama. The big pumpkin head carrying the lantern laughed with a strange laugh and respectfully greeted Wuming. Then, Wuming asked the question that had been bothering him. Speaking of which, how do you know my name? Wuming never introduced himself. In the conversation between Wuming and Haruai Hibakushi just now, Haruai Hibakushi also called Wuming friend and not Wuming. But whether it was Aisha or Jack, they both knew Wuming's name in this world. At this time, Haruai Hibakushi pulled Wuming's sleeve. Willow, you don't know? It's precisely because you announced your name to the public that no name will sit in the seat that only the organizers can sit in as a special guest and not as a community brought by White Yaksha. Although no name was also invited by White Yaksha, the former's identity was much more advantageous than the latter's. White Yaksha was also thinking for no name, so he announced to the public that no name was a community of friends that he invited to help. Although everyone was puzzled as to why the community with a 3-digit number was no name, it wasn't something they could gossip about, so no one said anything. What's more, whether it was the 3 problem children or Ren, the powerful strength that they had shown these days made the people who participated in the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony recognize no name. They recognized that no name didn't rely on a 3-digit number to be invited by White Yaksha. As for the fact that Wuming was completely unaware of this, it was very likely that it had something to do with the fact that Wuming often slipped away. However, it was impossible for White Yaksha to print his appearance and distribute it, right? There shouldn't be any, because Wuming hadn't seen a single photo of Wuming in the past few days. And White Yaksha had no other way to tell 54,545 what Wuming looked like. Even if there were other ways, it wouldn't work. Although Wuming didn't often go shopping, Wuming also went out these days to prepare for the Demon King's attack, so Wuming still met many passers-by. If White Yaksha really told everyone what he looked like, then Wuming couldn't have not noticed it. Then, Jack explained to Wuming. Yaha, to be able to release such a strong pressure, if it wasn't the Demon King, I'm afraid only Lord Willow, a friend of Lord White Yaksha. Jack, who had been smiling, said. Although he only had one expression. However, Wuming also figured out why he was recognized. Sure enough, strength was the best ID card and pass. Immediately afterward, Isha looked at Haruai Buyao with some jealousy. I was still thinking about who that powerful flame belonged to. It turns out that the friend who helped you is Lord Villo. Humph. I'll remember you. Haruai Buyao. Next time, I definitely won't lose. Jack, let's go. Isha said those words to Haruai Buyao, then jumped onto Jack's huge head. It wasn't that Isha wanted to run away. The Demon King's attack wasn't a small matter. Her community, Willow's Wisp, wasn't far from the outer gate of the 54545, but from Isha's point of view, it shouldn't be affected. However, although the Demon King's attack this time wouldn't affect her community's outer gate, she was still worried, so Isha wanted to go back to her community to take a look. And if there was nothing else, maybe she could bring some helpers to deal with the Demon King. Although the Demon King was a fear to most people, Isha wasn't afraid. Yaha, please don't mind, Miss Haruai Buyao. This is Isha's unique way of greeting. She recognizes you. Jack still used his unique laughter to reply. Jack, don't talk nonsense. It's time to go. Isha's face turned red in embarrassment, then she raised her hand and patted Jack's big pumpkin head. Yes, please forgive our rudeness. Yaha, Jack said goodbye to Wuming and Haruai Buyao, then flew away. After all, it was a pumpkin monster, so it was normal that it could fly. She's a little tsundere girl. Wuming didn't mind Isha's rudeness, and instead smiled as he watched Isha and Jack leave. Villo likes tsundere girls? Haruai Buyao tilted his head and looked at Wuming. I can't say that I like them. I'm just saying, don't take a seat with a code name. Wuming sighed, indicating that Haruai Buyao was focusing on the wrong thing. Understood. Haruai Buyao nodded seriously. Speaking of which, I feel like you've understood something strange. Speaking of which, how's my strength? Wuming didn't want to dwell on this topic. Very strong. Haruai Buyao nodded, then reached out with one hand, and a white flame filled with holiness burned in Haruai Buyao's palm. Indeed, that was Wuming's origin fire, so it was needless to say how strong it was. By burning the source of all things to destroy the opponent, this was a powerful weapon. It was worthy of being called the highest grade of human gift, as it could even borrow the origin dragon's flame. Wuming thought about it carefully, and it was normal for Haruai Buyao to obtain the origin fire from him, because Wuming's ability wasn't limited to the origin fire, and only the origin fire was the most basic and strongest ability of the origin dragon. Wuming had always relied on things he learned from other worlds to fight, and if he was just an origin dragon, then the origin fire was indeed the signature ability of the origin dragon race. However, the origin fire wasn't so easy to control, and Haruai Buyao clearly understood this. But this isn't something that I can control now. As soon as Haruai Buyao finished speaking, the origin fire began to expand as if it was no longer under his control. If nothing unexpected happened, it would explode in a few seconds. However, Wuming was here, so there wouldn't be any problems for a long time. Wuming gently pressed on the origin fire, and the flame was absorbed into his body as if it had met the source. Little idiot. Remember to throw it out quickly next time. If it explodes in your palm, even if you don't die, you'll lose a layer of skin. Wuming flicked Haruai Buyao's forehead. Don't think that a grenade won't hurt you just because you know how to pull the pin. If you don't fully control this power, you'll hurt yourself if you use it carelessly. I relied on the explosion of this uncontrollable flame to win by surprise, Haruai Hiroyuki said calmly as he covered his forehead where he had been flicked. And I don't think I'll get hurt next to you. After all, the owner of this power was here, so how could he get hurt? I didn't make an agreement with you to protect you from getting hurt. It's better to be careful. However, although Wuming said this, Haruai Buyao, who used Wuming's flame, was also another kind of Wuming's protection for Haruai Buyao. Understood, Haruai Buyao replied. However, the same answer as before gave Wuming a different experience. Then, they were beaten up by Black Rabbit. You two problematic children. Chapter 658. You two problematic children. What time is it now? Why are you still fooling around? Black Rabbit, who came to Wuming and Haruai Hibakushi's side, looked angry. This is the big event of the Demon King's attack. Do you two have to be so calm? Isn't 16 nights over? Let's delay it for a while. Wuming shrugged. Wuming knew very well that 16 nights had been holding back for a while. The gift competition of the fire dragon's birth was not enough for 16 knights to release her pressure. That was why 16 knights was the first to rush out when she saw the Demon King's attack. At this time, Haruai Hibakushi, who saw only Black Rabbit coming over, asked, "Speaking of which, where did the others go?" "Master Shadora and Mandela went to evacuate the crowd," Black Rabbit explained. For some reason, the Demon King's exclusive black contract document did not only appear in this competition venue, but also in the entire outer gate of 54,545. For the sake of others, Shadora's local boss, Salamandra, naturally had to take on the task of evacuating the crowd to a safe place. The Demon King's contract documents are all over the outer gate of 54,545? If that's the case, I'm afraid the entire outer gate of 54,545 has become the battlefield. Wu Ming speculated. Black Rabbit did not say anything, but Black Rabbit's silence meant that Wu Ming was not wrong. He was most likely right. Then, Black Rabbit continued. As for Master White Yaksha, she can't even protect herself. Speaking of White Yaksha, Black Rabbit seemed rather gloomy, and there was a hint of helplessness on her face. Wu Ming and Haruai Hibakushi frowned and looked at each other. It seemed that something had happened to White Yaksha. Then, Black Rabbit remembered something important and looked at Wu Ming. Right. Master White Yaksha also said that if nothing happened to Mr. Villo, don't get close to her anymore. Wu Ming was stunned, and then he realized. It was probably a curse on the sun. However, would Wu Ming be someone who ran away in the face of danger? How was that possible? If Wu Ming was really that rational, then he would not have been called a problem child by Black Rabbit. Let's go, Yao. Wu Ming nodded at Yao. Yes, Haruai Hiroyuki replied softly. Then, the two of them flew into the sky in the direction of the special seats of the competition venue, where White Yaksha was. Then, looking at the two people who flew to the VIP seats, Black Rabbit was stunned for a few seconds before it became irritable again. Wait a minute, I told you that you can't go over, you problematic children? Then, the two of them landed on the special seats. Then, Wu Ming and Haruhi Biai-chi discovered that there was an extra sphere made of black particles. As for the White Yaksha that we and Haruai Biao were searching for, they were wrapped in the black fog. When Wu Ming and Haruai Hibakushi saw White Yaksha also saw them. Seeing that Wu Ming was fine, White Yaksha heaved a sigh of relief. Villo. As long as you're fine. Then, as if coming to a realization, White Yaksha was shocked. No. Didn't I tell you not to come over? Why did you still come over? But just as White Yaksha finished speaking, the black fog that wrapped around White Yaksha split off and flew toward Wu Ming as if it had encountered a delicacy. Be careful. That's a seal against the sun. As long as it's the sun, it can't resist it at all. White Yaksha was shocked and hurriedly warned. But Wu Ming only smiled slightly. Then, what welcomed the black fog was a white flash of lightning. Zang! After the flash of the sword, the black fog that attacked Wu Ming disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. Looks like it can't do anything against a power that can even split a star. Wu Ming laughed jokingly. Phew! You! White Yaksha did not know what expression he should make. He could only laugh bitterly. Then, Wu Ming raised his hand that was holding the divine blade of salvation while maintaining his sword-swinging motion, and swung it in White Yaksha's direction. Zang! Another flash of white light with lightning flashed, and the black fog around White Yaksha instantly disappeared. But in the next second, the black fog appeared out of nowhere and wrapped around White Yaksha again as if it was endless. Seeing this, Wu Ming could not help but frown. It's useless, Villo. Deep in the heart of the black fog, White Yaksha shook his head. I'm the incarnation of the sun. This is the curse of the Black Death that came from me, the sun. Unless the Devil King is defeated, this curse will not be lifted. Because it was a continuous curse, Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation could not destroy it. Unless Wu Ming kept slashing, White Yaksha would be wrapped in the curse again once he relaxed. However, that was too unrealistic. Therefore, other than defeating the enemy completely, there was no other way. You know that the enemy is a Devil King related to the Black Death spot. Didn't you make some preparations, such as some means of resistance? Wu Ming was a little surprised. Although Wu Ming had said that his information was just a guess because of Mandela's words, White Yiksha should not have taken Wu Ming's information as wind. Of course I made preparations. However, I didn't expect the other party's seal to be so powerful. This Devil King is like the product of the Black Death Spot itself. Hearing White Yiksha's words, Wu Ming was relieved. The relationship between White Yiksha and Pest was akin to natural enemies. It was just like how the natural enemies of mammals were snakes. Although some humans were not afraid of snakes, as mammals, the fear of snakes was still engraved in their bones. The reason they were not afraid of snakes was only because they were raised. At this point, Wu Ming no longer felt conflicted. Then, Wu Ming picked up a black contract from the ground and read it. Seeing that the leader designated by the competition fee was White Yiksha, Wu Ming could not help but laugh. Choosing you as the leader and not allowing you to move about freely, Pest is truly merciless. This was like allowing you to participate in the competition, but not allowing you to appear. However, because of the connection between the sun and the Black Death, White Yiksha was bound to suffer this time. Stop mocking me. Hurry up and defeat the Devil King. The Black Death Spot is not like anything else. If the Black Death Spot spreads and hides in the situation or even your bodies, the consequences will be unimaginable, White Yiksha said solemnly. White Yiksha was right. The incubation period of the Black Death Spot was only a few days. The Black Death released by the Devil King was even shorter. If infected, it was possible for one to die instantly. Wu Ming nodded and then looked at the victory conditions. Chapter 659. Reading through the black contract document, Wu Ming saw the organizer's user. Grim Gimli Hamel Ha. Wu Ming nodded. It was indeed Hamel. Then, Wu Ming looked at the participants, which was Wu Ming's conditions for winning. There were 2 conditions. The first was to defeat the organizer's game leader. The second was to break the fake inheritance and establish a real inheritance. Seeing this, Wu Ming felt that it was quite easy to achieve. Be it the former or the latter, it was not difficult for Wu Ming. The former depended entirely on strength, while the latter depended entirely on wisdom. Wu Ming had no problem with either. However, in Wu Ming's opinion, the part about breaking the fake inheritance and establishing a real inheritance was still lacking. Simply put, there was a lack of information. However, Wu Ming was not prepared to follow the other party's arrangement. After all, Pest was not the only one who had the organizer's authority. At this moment, Black Rabbit hurriedly ran over. Ha, ha, you two. Didn't I tell you not to come over? Black Rabbit panted. It was unknown whether he was tired or angry. It's fine now, Black Rabbit. The curse can no longer take effect on the Villo, White Yiksha reminded Black Rabbit. Following White Yiksha's words, the black fog surrounding White Yiksha stirred. However, it did not attack the Villo. It looked as if it was afraid of Wu Ming. However, the black fog was targeting White Yiksha. After witnessing Wu Ming's power, the black fog became obedient. At this moment, Haruai Buyao spoke. Right, Black Rabbit, where did Flying Bird go? Haruai Buyao looked around. There was no trace of Zhou Flying Bird, and the only one who flew out was 16 Knights. Logically speaking, Zhou Flying Bird should still be here. After Haruai Buyao finished speaking, Black Rabbit looked around. He could not find Flying Bird. Right, where's Miss Flying Bird? Why is it gone? Black Rabbit exclaimed in surprise. We're asking you. Wu Ming helplessly knocked on the Black Rabbit's head. It hurts. Black Rabbit doesn't know where Miss Flying Bird went. Just now, Black Rabbit clearly told Miss Flying Bird to stay here obediently. Black Rabbit said in a wronged manner as it held its head. You don't have to look for her. Flying Bird left with the elf she was protecting. Bai Yaksha was afraid that everyone would be worried, so he added. She has her own opportunities. You need not worry. Since White Yaksha said so, it was likely that Jiu Yufei really had his own fortuitous encounter. The 3 of them nodded. After that, Wu Ming looked at Black Rabbit and Kasuga Biao. You two, go help 16th Knights. I'm going to use my authority as the organizer. Tell 16th Knights to get ready. Black Rabbit and Haruai Buyao were stunned, then nodded and left to find 16 Knights. Although it had only been a short time since they joined the community, Black Rabbit and Kasuga Biao still had faith in Wu Ming. However, the two of them were still emotionally affected by Wu Ming's words. People who had the authority as the organizer were rare. The chances of someone with the organizer's authority using the organizer's authority were even rarer. That was because the organizer's authority could only be used under two circumstances. First, it was used by the Demon King to invade others. Second, it was used by the person who faced the Demon King. White Yaksha was such a person. Without the Demon King, White Yaksha and the others would not use the organizer's authority because there was no need. Although the organizer's authority was a punishment for those who did not abide by the rules and found loopholes in the rules, when the time came, those people would voluntarily admit defeat. That was because once they were trapped by the organizer's authority, the result would not be so simple. Simply put, it was the difference between surrendering and being caught. Hence, the organizer's authority was basically used to deal with disobedient demon kings. Oh, Willow Boy, you're going to use the organizer's authority? Hearing Wu Ming's words, White Yaksha looked at Wu Ming with a smile. That's because I'm guessing that Pest isn't the only force attacking. Could it be that you've gotten into trouble again? White Yaksha asked with interest. We can't be sure if there's anyone else. I can't be sure, but... Wu Ming said as he looked at White Yaksha. This time, just be a good spectator. Leave the limelight to us. No name, White Yaksha. Wu Ming smiled at White Yaksha. This made the helpless White Yaksha sit on the ground unhappily and turn his head away. At that moment, the ground suddenly shook. Rumble. Immediately after, the sky started to darken, and the moon appeared high in the sky. In the distance, a small mountain could be vaguely seen. If one stood high up in the sky, they would be able to see a river flowing down from the mountain. The surrounding buildings in the northern district seemed to have been dragged into the ground by something, and all of them sank. Then, what floated up to the surface were Western German medieval village buildings. Not only that, but even the land had changed its appearance. Only the people participating in the fire dragon's birth ceremony did not change. Also, there was something else that did not change, and that was the glass painting of Hamel's Pied Piper. It was still in its original place. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and the houses were all dark and empty. The streets were filled with people who had come to participate in the fire dragon's birth ceremony. It was as if someone had brought everyone here to another place. Inherent barrier? Wu Ming muttered silently. Although I don't know where you found this term, it's very appropriate for the current situation. It looks like we've come to the Demon King's home ground. White Yaksha sat on the ground filled with black fog and spoke to Wu Ming. Logically speaking, White Yaksha should be enveloped by the black fog and unable to communicate with the outside world. However, due to Wu Ming's previous sword strike to the black fog, and White Yaksha's preparations to deal with the Black Death's inheritance, the black fog only limited White Yaksha's ability to move. Conversation was still possible. This might not be Yuting anymore. If I'm not wrong, this might be Hamiltown, right? Before White Yaksha could finish, Wu Ming interrupted him. White Yaksha nodded. The countryside at night, the mountain range in the distance, and the river. In addition, the enemy this time was Hamel's Pied Piper. Therefore, this was most likely Hamiltown. However, Wu Ming smiled. Fortunately, my tricks weren't affected at all. Then Wu Ming snapped his fingers. In an instant, in Hamiltown, other than the few people selected by no-name Wu Ming, everyone else disappeared in an instant. Such a large-scale spatial movement. Willow Boy, you scared me. White Yaksha looked at White Yaksha in surprise. That's right. Wu Ming had used spatial movement to move almost everyone in Hamiltown out of the inherent barrier. Chapter 660. However, Wu Ming was not powerful enough to teleport everyone out of the outer sect in an instant. Because I already knew that the Demon King would attack, I have been wandering around the outer sect for the past few days. But in fact, I was setting up a space technique. The purpose was to be useful at this moment. Wu Ming explained. Wu Ming's spatial spell was a spell that Wu Ming had researched himself. Its main body was the Lune Rune, and its auxiliary body was the magic of Yggdrasil, World Tree. It was not that Wu Ming was talented, but Wu Ming's noble artifact, the Nameless Spellbook, helped him create the spatial spell. As everyone knew, Heroic spirits could no longer increase their strength because they were dead, and their noble artifacts could no longer grow. That was the tragedy of being a fighter for two great restraints. Although it was an iron rule for heroic spirits, it did not affect Wu Ming at all. The simplest and crudest reason was that Wu Ming was still alive. Cough, cough. In the beginning, Wu Ming refined his weapon into a noble artifact because his noble artifact had greater possibilities and growth potential. That was why Wu Ming followed Skaha's suggestion to refine his noble artifact. After all, if Wu Ming's noble artifact could not grow, then it would be useless to Wu Ming, who was a root dragon. Of course, Wu Ming was the only one who had the ability to upgrade normal weapons and even non-weapons into relics and make them grow. The Nameless Spellbook was the best example. After following Wu Ming for so many years, although it was not directly baptized by the root dragon, the Nameless Spellbook was indirectly affected. Although it was not that powerful, the Nameless Spellbook could fuse the Loon Rune and Yggdrasil, World Tree, magic to form a new magic spell or magic. Just like that, Wu Ming wanted this spatial spell. After recording the Loon Rune into the Nameless Spellbook, the book automatically created this special spatial spell. However, in White Yiksha's opinion, no matter how special it was, it could not be so overpowered. He could teleport everyone within the spatial spell's range with a snap of his fingers. Did he have to be so overpowered? Of course it was not that overpowered. That was because the target of Wu Ming's spatial spell was not land or buildings, nor was it engraved in space. It was for everyone. After all, whether it was engraving the spatial spell on buildings or space, there was a possibility of failure. This failure did not refer to engraving the spatial spell, but because Wu Ming needed to teleport people. Wu Ming could not guarantee that everyone who was engraved with the spatial spell would be teleported away when he activated the spell. Therefore, Wu Ming chose to engrave the spatial spell on everyone. Don't fool me. White Yiksha narrowed his eyes at Wu Ming. How many people came to participate in the fire dragon's birth ceremony? Based on tens of millions of people, that was still a conservative estimate. Therefore, how could Wu Ming inscribe spatial tactics for so many people in such a short time? Moreover, it was not as if there were no powerhouses among them. How could they not realize that they had been engraved with someone else's spell? Moreover, if nothing unexpected happened, these people were now in the enemy's gift competition. Logically speaking, they should not be teleported away. When White Yiksha asked one question after another, Wu Ming patiently explained to him. First of all, the answer to the first question is that this spatial spell has the attribute of transmission and multiplication. White Yiksha, who was not stupid, understood Wu Ming's simple explanation. Because of transmission, when the person with the spatial spell on their body comes into contact with others, they will transmit their spatial spell to the other person. And because of multiplication, the spatial spell will split and multiply once when it is transmitted. Wu Ming did not continue. White Yiksha understood everything. According to what Wu Ming said, every time the person with the spatial spell on their body came into contact with others, the spatial spell on the pathogen would split and multiply once. The extra one would be transmitted to the person in contact with the pathogen. In this way, a second pathogen would be formed. The powerful ability to split and multiply, in addition to Wu Ming constantly running to various places in the outer sect to spread the virus, allowed Wu Ming to engrave his spatial spell on everyone in a short few days. How did Wu Ming add these complicated effects into the spatial spell? Did you think the Nameless Spellbook was useless? But how did you guarantee that you would not be discovered by others? White Yiksha asked. Not to mention people like White Yiksha, even if the people who came to participate in the fire dragon's birth ceremony were weak, there would definitely be many people who could discover this spatial spell. After all, this was the courtyard. Even if they were weak, they still had the gift of miracles accompanying them. I will answer this and the third question together. The third question was, how did Wu Ming make these people, who were under the authority of another person's host, leave the other person's home field and be teleported out? That's because the fire dragon's birth ceremony was already under my authority of the host. Because it was under Wu Ming's authority of the host, even White Yiksha did not discover anything strange. Impossible. When the host's authority is activated, there will definitely be a contract document. White Yiksha instantly refuted Wu Ming. But Wu Ming smiled at this. Who told you I didn't issue a contract document? Wu Ming smiled and snapped his fingers. Golden ripples appeared behind him. The mountain of white parchment paper seemed to have a breakthrough and surged out from this golden ripple. The host's authority had the ability to force others to participate in their gift competition. Moreover, when the host's authority was activated, a contract document would appear. The way it appeared could be chosen by the person who activated the host's authority. Whether it appeared out of thin air or descended from the sky, it could all be chosen by oneself. Wu Ming chose to descend from the sky. However, the contract document was issued, but the host's authority did not stipulate that it had to be forced for participants to see the contract document. Since that was the case, it was much more convenient for Wu Ming. Therefore, the moment these contract documents appeared, they were immediately intercepted by Wu Ming himself. Do you still remember the flame text that appeared in the sky on the day of the fire dragon's birth ceremony? Wu Ming asked with a smile. Of course I remember. At that time, it seemed like it was according to your suggestion to make these flame texts disappear in the form of fireworks. After White Yaksha finished speaking, he instantly felt that something was wrong. Could it be? White Yaksha suddenly looked at Wu Ming. That's right. It's just as you think, White Yaksha. Wu Ming smiled proudly. Chapter 661. Wu Ming had suggested that the flaming text should appear in different colors. After using it as a signboard, they would light it up like fireworks in order not to be wasted. Fireworks of different colors were lit up together, bringing about enthusiasm for the people attending the fire dragon's birth ceremony. The fire dragon's birth ceremony was so wide that the flaming text that appeared in the sky was destined to cover almost the entire venue. Wu Ming had activated the organizer's authority when the flaming text was lit up like fireworks. Then, when the contract appeared, Wu Ming had activated his relic, Dragonist. The current Dragonist was no worse than Gilgamesh's Babylon treasure vault. The only thing that could be said was that the storage space was not very big. That was why Wu Ming had only opened a hole in his relic space. The contract documents were like a raging wave that had broken through a dam, gushing out crazily. At that time, with the help of the beautiful colors of the fireworks, Wu Ming's golden ripples had successfully swallowed all the contract documents that had just appeared in the sky. It had taken less than 3 seconds. Then, the fireworks had disappeared, and Wu Ming's golden ripples had all been shut down. Nobody had noticed anything unusual. No, it should be said that there were people who had noticed the appearance of the golden ripples, but they had all treated the golden ripples as the special effects of the fireworks. It was the same for White Yaksha. That was why White Yaksha had instantly understood when Wu Ming had mentioned it. She was also one of the people who had noticed the golden ripples. After all, even with the cover of the fireworks, the golden ripples were too conspicuous. If she had known beforehand that the fireworks of Salamandra would not produce golden ripples, or if she had asked about it afterward, White Yaksha would definitely have been suspicious. However, it was impossible for White Yaksha to ask about the fireworks of Salamandra, just like how Shadora had not asked Mandela about the golden ripples. She had also treated the golden ripples as a special effect. As for Mandela, when Wu Ming had made that suggestion, he had already guessed that Wu Ming was up to something. When he had seen the golden ripples, he had guessed that it was Wu Ming's doing. However, how could Mandela, who was already in cahoots with Wu Ming, expose his allies' plan? In the end, Wu Ming's plan, which had a lot of loopholes, had been perfectly implemented under everyone's neglect. White Yaksha did not know what to say. Wu Ming's plan had left her speechless. Now, White Yaksha finally understood why Wu Ming's space technique could teleport everyone away from the Devil Lord's home ground. It was because the Devil's Lord had activated the organizer's authority in Wu Ming's home ground. It was as if a group of criminals wanted to kill someone, and then they rushed into that person's house with knives. In the end, the criminals rushed in and found that it was actually a fully staffed weapons and ammunition depot. It was all for nothing. Pest's organizer's authority could be used when Wu Ming was not doing anything. However, when Wu Ming started to take action, her organizer's authority had already lost its effect. To put it simply, Wu Ming was the first authority and Pest was the second authority. When the first authority was not doing anything, the second authority was in charge. However, when the first authority spoke, the second authority was nothing. However, due to Pest's uniqueness, I can't do anything about the seal she placed on you. Wu Ming smiled at White Yaksha. Although Wu Ming had a way to remove the Black Death's vengeance against the sun, it would take too much time. It would be better for him to directly look for Pest. Humph. Of course I know that. Don't worry about me. Hurry up and defeat the enemy. Didn't you say that there might be other enemies? Hurry up and leave. Although I can't move and can't use much of my strength, I still have ways to protect myself. Then I'll take my leave first, White Yaksha. After saying this, Wuming opened a transport gate and left. When White Yaksha saw Wuming leaving, he sighed. Really, it would have been better if you had told me earlier. You even made me worried. White Yaksha complained. Then, he closed his eyes and began to rest. Wuming left through the transport gate and arrived at the roof of a house. What entered his eyes was a scene of a 3 versus 3 battle. Reverse 16 Knights was fighting with Pest's subordinate, the man in military uniform. When Wuming saw the man in military uniform erupting with a powerful aura that was completely different from before, he frowned. Has he become a god? After all, Wuming was half a god slayer. No matter which world it was, Wuming was quite sensitive toward the definition of a god. I'm afraid that he has obtained a godhead. After all, in this world, as long as one had a godhead, one would be a god. As for where the man in military uniform had obtained his godhead, wasn't it obvious? Naturally, it was given to him by his master, Pest. Although this made things awkward for a god, in the box court world, becoming a god was as simple as that. After Wuming finished speaking, he stopped watching the fight between the two men. Although the man in military uniform had obtained a godhead and seemed to be fighting Reverse 16 Knights quite well, Wuming, who was familiar with Reverse 16 Knights' strength, knew that it was only a matter of time before the man in military uniform would be defeated. Then, Wuming looked toward Pest's subordinate, the woman in revealing clothes. She was in a deadlock with Kasuga Biao. No, it should be said that she was about to lose. At this moment, this female subordinate of Pest's was starting to become faintly discernible. This meant that she was about to disappear. Wuming could clearly sense the aura of his origin fire from her body. Although Kasuga Biao was unable to fully control the power he obtained from Wuming, he could use Wuming's origin fire as a bomb. Although it was very likely that he would injure himself, this was a killing move that could kill his enemy in a single strike. Pest's female subordinate did not disappear immediately. It was likely that something had taken the hit for her. As for the unknown person or object that had taken the hit for her, it was burned to ashes by the origin fire. Then, Wuming looked toward Pest. To Wuming's surprise, Pest had also become a god. Is this the boost from Hamiltown, or did someone give Pest a godhead? Wuming guessed. Pest was currently fighting against the Black Rabbit, who was wielding a golden lightning bolt. Upon closer inspection, the Black Rabbit was not wielding a golden lightning bolt at all. It was clearly a Vajra with golden lightning bolts on it. That was most likely the Sakra's god relic, or rather, a simulated god relic. As the Sakra's dependent, it was naturally not strange for you two to possess the Sakra's god relic. Although the lightning bolts could not do anything to Pest, they could not harm her either. However, the black mist that Pest released from her sleeves that carried the aura of death would brush past the Black Rabbit's body every single time. When he sensed the aura of death from the black mist that was much more powerful than the black mist that trapped the White Yaksha, Wuming believed that if the black mist hit the Black Rabbit head-on, it would definitely die instantly since it did not possess any defensive gifts. At this moment, the Black Rabbit's expression turned grim when it saw Wuming's arrival. Its movements slowed down slightly. However, this slowed down his movements by a bit, allowing Pest to seize the opportunity. In an instant, Pest arrived behind the Black Rabbit with a furious expression on her face. She aimed her pitch-black sleeves at the back of the Black Rabbit's head. Goodbye, Sakra's dependent. Chapter 662. Hearing those words, Black Rabbit was greatly alarmed. Immediately after, a large amount of black mist sprayed out from Pest's sleeve. However, the black mist did not hit Black Rabbit. Instead, it hit a purple-black ripple. Villo! Black Rabbit cried out in pleasant surprise. Seeing this familiar ripple, how could Black Rabbit not know who saved him? Sure enough, there was also a ripple beside the Villo. Countless amounts of black mist sprayed out from the ripple. The ripple in front of Black Rabbit was connected to the ripple beside Wuming. Just like that, Pest's attack was diverted away. Tiss! Pest spat in a very displeased manner. Soon after, she stopped releasing the wind of death and quickly pulled away from Black Rabbit. The black rabbit also suddenly jumped and came to Wu Ming's side. Reverse 16 Knights dragged his blood-stained right arm and jumped onto the roof where Wu Ming was at almost the same time as Black Rabbit. Together with Haruai Buyao, who was gasping for breath, Reverse 16 Knights jumped onto the roof where Wu Ming was at. When 16 Knights and Yao arrived at Wu Ming's roof, as well as the instant when Wu Ming saw Pest, he immediately understood what had happened. Most likely, the two subordinates of Pest who were fighting Reverse 16 Knights and Haruai Buyao had already left. Wu Ming calmly put away the teleportation gate that was no longer releasing the wind of death. Soon after, he took out a crystal bottle containing a red healing potion and tossed it to Reverse 16 Knights. Thanks. Reverse 16 Knights received the bottle and casually thanked Han Shuo. Soon after, he bit off the cap of the crystal bottle and gulped down the healing potion within the crystal bottle. In an instant, a green radiance enveloped Reverse 16 Knight's right arm. Although there were still traces of blood, his injury was completely healed. Soon after, Wu Ming looked at Pest, who was flying in the air. This is the second time we've met, right? This is the first time we've officially met, Pest. Wu Ming greeted Pest with the tone of an old friend. However, this only made Pest feel disgusted. Shut up. I don't want to hear your voice. Pest's expression was slightly malevolent as she glared at Wu Ming. Pest had long since noticed that the people trapped in Hamel had left the town. Although she did not know why, there was a high chance that it had something to do with Wu Ming, the departure of her companions and the fact that her plan had basically failed. Then, she saw the person with the sun in his body. This made Pest rather furious. If it wasn't for you, I would have already succeeded. Pest shouted somewhat hysterically. However, this was just self-deception. At least without me, your plan won't succeed. You know that, don't you? After witnessing Reverse 16 Knights and Kasuga Yaori eliminate her subordinates and companions, Pest realized that these two possessed considerable strength. In addition, there were also Indra's subordinates here, as well as the leaders of Salamandra, Shadora and Letitia, who weren't here. If all of them joined hands, Pest really wasn't confident. Not to mention, what if there were other experts who weren't weak? One could only say that Pest did not gather enough information beforehand. Or perhaps she. In short, Pest, who had understood everything, was merely self-deception, self-consolation, and venting the dissatisfaction in her heart. It's over, said Wu Ming indifferently. Truth be told, Wu Ming did not wish to attack Pest. Possessing the authority to take revenge on the sun meant that Pest had been abused by the sun. Because of that, Pest chose to become the Demon King. Demon Kings were loathsome, frightening, and hateful. However, there was a good saying. A hateful person would definitely have a pitiful side. That said, Wu Ming also knew this saying. A pitiful person would definitely have a hateful side. The reason why Wu Ming did not wish to attack Pest was because Pest had accepted Wu Ming's cotton candy back then. If Wu Ming wasn't here today, Pest's arrival would definitely result in casualties. Although Wu Ming should not continue to negotiate with such a wretched person, Wu Ming felt that a person who was interested in cotton candy, who accepted Wu Ming's cotton candy with the seemingly far-fetched reason of not wasting food, and who was enraged by the death of her companions, a person like this could still be saved. However, there was another saying. If the heavens want a person to die, they must first make him or her crazy. It's not over yet. Pest replied to Wu Ming furiously. As if responding to Pest's final words of madness, the glass paintings with the words Hamel's Pied Piper, in the town of Hamel all erupted with powerful power. The power condensed into black mist. Then, in merely an instant, the black mist condensed above Pest's head and turned into a large amount of black substance. Slowly, the black substance absorbed even more of the black mist and began to gradually grow in size. Although it appeared to be slow, in merely a few seconds, the black substance had grown to a size comparable to the entire town of Hamel. As for the glass paintings with the words Hamel's Pied Piper on them, they were all shattered. Regardless of whether it was Wu Ming, 16 Knights, Black Rabbit or Haruhibu Yai-Chi, the four of them could clearly tell that this clump of black substance was no simple matter. It was no longer in existence on the same level as the black mist from before. If the clump of black substance above Pest's head were to smash down, the impact alone would be enough to shatter the entire town of Hamel. However, as Wu Ming was here, Black Rabbit and Haruhibu Yai-Chi were not too worried. As for 16th Knights, he did not arrogantly say, "Leave it to me to deal with." After all, 16th Knight's only possessed inhuman abilities in his body, fists, legs, and other aspects. Faced with such a large clump of unknown black substance, he did not think that his fists would be able to destroy it before it landed. As for Wu Ming, he would naturally be able to do it. However, Wu Ming did not intend to choose this path. Instead, he chose another path. Killing Pest would solve all his problems. Golden ripples spread out from Wu Ming's body. A white holy spear was automatically spat out from within. Then, a hand grasped the spear tightly. As the space within the dragon nest was fixed, no matter what state Wu Ming was in, as long as he could open the dragon nest, he would be able to take out the items within. As for these items, they were all genuine items that had accompanied Wu Ming in his adventures. The item that Wu Ming took out was the one that had accompanied him from the very beginning. It was a precious artifact that was given to him by his master and sister, Skaha. It was an artifact refined from a branch cut from the core of the Nordic World Tree. At this moment, Wu Ming held the spear of the World Tree in a reverse grip. He was in a throwing posture as he madly poured his magic power into the holy spear. Then, Wu Ming uttered the true name of the companion that had accompanied him for a long time and threw it out. Pest was unwilling to give up. Carrying the madness of perishing together with her, she charged down ferociously with a black substance above her head. Together with the holy spear, the holy light pierced toward Pest, who was charging over with a black substance. Then, the light covered 16th Knight's, Black Rabbit, and Yao's eyes. Chapter 663. You really gave me a fright. The voice belonged to 16 Knights. Hearing 16 Knights' voice, Black Rabbit slowly opened his eyes that were shut due to the strong light. Then, Black Rabbit noticed that the scene before his eyes had changed. The scene before him was supposed to be Hamel Town with the moon hanging high in the sky. However, it was now the fire dragon birth ceremony with the sun hanging high in the sky. What's going on? Black Rabbit looked at 16 Knights and Kasuga Hibaku beside him in shock. Oh right. Where's the Villo and Pest? Why are they gone? Black Rabbit asked anxiously. However, regardless of whether it was 16 Knights or Kasuga Hibaku, they had no time to answer Black Rabbit. Dong! Kasuga Hibaku leaped behind Black Rabbit. Then, he kicked a two-headed dragon lizard that looked like a lizard behind Black Rabbit and sent it flying. Let's deal with the danger before us first, Black Rabbit. 16 Knights also sent the two-headed dragon lizard in front of him flying with a punch. He answered Black Rabbit excitedly without even turning his head. Black Rabbit was confused. He did not know what was going on. Aren't these the split bodies of absolute evil? Why would it appear here? The Black Rabbit let out a sorrowful cry. Oh, looks like these guys aren't as simple as they seem. 16 Knights was slightly excited. How could this be? However, there was no time for Black Rabbit to complain. But don't think too much about it. They're coming. On the other side, Wu Ming was hovering in the sky above the fire dragon birth ceremony. At this moment, Wu Ming was holding a ball of black substance in his hand as he hovered in the air. Pest was killed by Wu Ming's relic. The explosion caused by the aftershock destroyed Hamel Town as well. The instant before Hamel Town exploded, Wu Ming activated the spatial art that he had carved on Black Rabbit, 16 Knights, and Yao and sent them out. This was why Black Rabbit and the other two discovered that they had returned to the fire dragon birth ceremony when they opened their eyes. White Yaksha aside, the spatial explosion was slightly dangerous for Black Rabbit and the other two. Oh right. By the way, when Pest died, the curse on White Yaksha had disappeared. Thus, Wu Ming did not bother with White Yaksha. If a mere spatial explosion could kill White Yaksha, then Wu Ming would definitely find a piece of tofu to kill himself. The reason why Wu Ming didn't leave with Black Rabbit and the others was because of the black substance in Wu Ming's hand. This was a strand of energy that Wu Ming had intercepted before Pest disappeared. We'll talk about it later. As Wu Ming spoke, he placed the energy he intercepted from Pest into the golden ripple that appeared beside Wu Ming. Then, the golden ripple closed. Wu Ming looked down. Sure enough, Pest is not the only guest here this time around. The reason why Wu Ming said this was because a large number of twin-headed lizards had appeared in the fire dragon birth ceremony. These twin-headed lizards that resembled dragons were constantly attacking the fire dragon birth ceremony. Now, a portion of the fire dragon birth ceremony had already turned into ruins. As for the people rescued by Wuming from Hamel, although there were many of them, they were all moved to one place by Wuming. Then, under the arrangements of Shadora and Mandela, Salamandra immediately evacuated these people. They completely withdrew from the fire dragon birth ceremony. That's right. When Wuming moved the majority of the people out of Hamel, Shadora, Mandela, and Salamandra's guards were all moved out together. Afterward, Shadora and Mandela discovered the twin-headed dragon's attack in time and protected democracy. Then, without even fighting, they directly withdrew from the fire dragon birth ceremony. Although ordinary people might not understand this action, some people who had lived long enough or had rich experiences understood that the enemy was not that simple. Why? Naturally, it was because of the twin-headed dragon's strength. These twin-headed dragons were not ordinary existences. They were all the splits of some ancient demon king. Among them, the strongest of the splits had god-level strength. Apart from that, these splits could split again through blood. In other words, they were existences that would increase in number the more they fought. Not to mention the number, just the fact that the strongest of the splits was a god-level existence was already enough to deal with. If Salamandra's members were to fight against the twin-headed dragon army, there was an 80 to 90% chance that Salamandra's members would be wiped out. That was because these twin-headed dragons were existences that ranked at the bottom of the 5 digits. What did a 5-digit number mean? Pest was a 5-digit number. Her all-out attack could kill most of the people in the fire dragon birth ceremony. It was that simple. Even if it was a 5-digit number, it was not something that Salamandra, who was in the middle or lower 5-digit number, could deal with. Furthermore, the fire dragon birth ceremony was held in a 7-digit number outer gate. Even if they were experts, they would not exceed the 5-digit number. Thus, Salamandra could only choose to have everyone retreat. However, retreating was just retreating. Those who were strong, such as Jiu Yu who had received a new gift, Aisha and Jack who had been defeated by Haruai Hikari, Shadora who was the leader of Salamandra, as well as 16 knights, Black Rabbit and Haruai Hikari who had been accidentally teleported to the back of the twin-headed dragon by Silent Wonder, were engaged in a desperate battle with the twin-headed dragon. However, with so many twin-headed dragons, how could Salamandra possibly be able to hold them back with just these few people? The main reason was because Letitia was here. In the beginning, when Wuming teleported the majority of the people away, Wuming had also teleported Letitia. Because Wuming was afraid that someone would take the opportunity to attack the fire dragon birth ceremony outside while he was dealing with Pest in the town of Hamel, Wuming notified Letitia through the connection of his dependent incarnation. Letitia was naturally very obedient and was teleported outside by Wuming. Then, the twin-headed dragon army attacked. This was because Letitia notified Shadora and Mandela. After the two of them investigated the situation, they hurriedly evacuated the people at the fire dragon birth ceremony. After Letitia was teleported out by Wuming, she discovered the twin-headed dragon's whereabouts. After using her ability to notify Shadora, she pulled on her hair rope and transformed into her adult form. Then, Letitia started fighting the twin-headed dragons. Although some of the twin-headed dragons were very powerful and had reached the 5-digit number of deities, and some had even reached the 4-digit number, most of the twin-headed dragons were still very weak. They only had the strength of a 5-digit number deity. Therefore, Letitia was able to deal with them. Don't forget that Letitia was no longer an ordinary 4-digit number deity. She had become Wuming's dependent and had obtained an extraordinary power to protect her. Strictly speaking, in the fire dragon birth ceremony, apart from Wuming and White Yaksha, the most powerful person was Letitia. However, even if Letitia was no longer an ordinary 4-digit number, she was still unable to defeat the twin-headed dragon army. There was no other reason other than that these guys could split up. Chapter 664. Although he did not know why there were records, Wuming had learned about the origin of these two-headed dragons from the underground library of no name. They were the splits of the blood of the oldest demon king that had existed since the beginning of the box court. That demon king was called Az Dakaha, and he was the most powerful evil god in the sect of fire. He was one of the oldest god slayers, and he was called absolute evil in the humans' final trial. In the box court world, some demon kings did not fall because they abused their authority. Instead, they were born as demon kings. Azedakaha was such an existence. Because he was evil, when he was born, he descended as a demon king. The reason why Azedakaha hadn't been seen all these years was because 200 years ago, it was led by the largest community in the East District. Together with the many top-level communities in the box court, Azedakaha was sealed away. That's right, it was no name that sealed Azedakaha 200 years ago, and Salamandra was also an ally community of no name at that time. Because of this, Salamandra chose to evacuate the crowd after knowing that the enemy was the two-headed dragon splits of the Demon King. They sent their elite forces to fight against these two-headed dragons. The reason why these two-headed dragons were so difficult to deal with was not because of their strength, but because they could split. This was Azedakaha's special characteristic. Its blood would give birth to Azedakaha's splits. The first generation of two-headed dragons that were born from its blood had the strength of a god. These first generation would inherit Azedakaha's special characteristic, and their blood would give birth to splits. However, the second and third generation of two-headed dragons that were born later on would have their strength greatly weakened. However, the weakest of them would still have the strength of a 5-digit level. 200 years ago, in the battle against Azedakaha had shed a lot of blood. That blood had split into these two-headed dragons and spread throughout the box court world. Even after 200 years of sealing Azedakaha, Box Ting still hadn't completely eliminated all of Azedakaha's doppelgangers. However, even if there was still a two-headed dragon in the courtyard, it couldn't have suddenly appeared here. One had to know that this was the boundary wall between the 3999999 outer sect and the 4000000 outer sect. Although it couldn't be considered as flourishing, it wasn't remote either. How could these two-headed dragons suddenly barge in? There was no doubt that someone was behind this. Don't tell me it's that Maxwell guy. The first person Wu Ming thought of was the man who had been killed by Wu Ming in an instant but had strangely resurrected and escaped using a spatial ability. There was no other reason, because among the group of forces that wanted to purchase Letitia, only this guy called Maxwell was slightly unfathomable to Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming didn't recognize all of the other parties' organizations. It might have been done by someone else. But all in all, it was better to get rid of the two-headed dragons first. Wu Ming stretched out his hand and golden ripples appeared, spitting out a slightly twisted scepter with 7 golden snake heads with different colored gems at the top. It was the scepter of Ains Vulgan that Wu Ming hadn't touched for a long time. It couldn't be helped. There was no chance to use it. The golden ripples disappeared, and Wu Ming held the scepter of Ains Vulgan in his hand and gently tapped the void with the tip of the scepter at the bottom. Ding! A strange sound came out, and at the same time, ripples appeared at the place where the scepter of Ains Vulgan had tapped. Wu Ming activated his own inherent enchantment, Nasalic's 6th layer. In an instant, Wu Ming stood on the spectator stand of the ancient Colosseum, and those who were fighting with the two-headed dragons, such as 16 Knights and Black Rabbit, also came to the position around Wu Ming in an instant. Master! As soon as Letitia saw Wu Ming, she immediately came to Wu Ming's side, put on her hairband, returned to her lowly form, and respectfully lowered her head. You've worked hard, Letitia. Wu Ming smiled and patted Letitia's little head. As expected, the lowly form was better. It's Letitia's honor, Master. Letitia replied to Wu Ming with a joyful face. It seemed that because of the dependent incarnation, Letitia was becoming more and more clingy to Wu Ming. Villo. Senior Letitia. What's going on? Black Rabbit exclaimed because of the shock. Don't worry, Black Rabbit. This is my home ground. Wu Ming said softly. Oh, Colosseum, you have such a bad taste. 16 Knights commented as he looked around. I've already brought all the two-headed dragons here, don't worry, Wu Ming said as he pointed to the center of the Colosseum below. Countless two-headed dragons crowded the Colosseum and roared crazily as if they were trapped beasts about to meet their death. Logically speaking, the original Colosseum on the 6th floor of Nasalic shouldn't be able to fit these two-headed dragons, but because it was an inherent enchantment, and because Wu Ming used the staff of Anziergen to adjust the size of the Colosseum, it could fit them. The reason why Wu Ming was able to move all the two-headed dragons and 16 knights into his inherent enchantment was because of Wu Ming's authority as the host. Wu Ming didn't say that he only set up a spatial tactic on the people, he also set up many tactics in the venue and space. Even if you have the authority as the host, don't lower your guard against these existences. Those are definitely the Demon King's clones. White Yaksha came to Wu Ming's side at some point and looked down solemnly. Due to the fact that Pest had been killed, the seal that bound White Yaksha had also been removed. White Yaksha naturally recognized the existence of these Demon King's clones and was about to attack in shock. In the end, she and the others were brought here along with all the attacking two-headed dragons. I naturally won't lower my guard, but since these guys have come here, they definitely have nowhere to run today. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Anzi-Ergen tapped the ground with the staff of Anzi-Ergen. In an instant, countless demon kings rushed toward the two-headed dragon army from the corners and entrances of the Colosseum. When the two-headed dragon army saw that there were living creatures, they immediately charged forward. In an instant, the monsters and the two-headed dragon army clashed. This shocking scene stunned Shadora, Aisha, Flying Bird, Yao, Black Rabbit, and the other women. Of course, White Yaksha was a 10,000-year-old lowly, so she wasn't considered a woman. Although Wu Ming's monster army was ferocious, the two-headed dragon army's strength was obvious. However, Wu Ming's monsters were endless. The two-headed dragon army could split up when it was injured, which led to a balanced situation at the moment. Do you need help, Willow Brat? White Yaksha saw that Wu Ming's monster army couldn't take down the two-headed dragons in a short time, and her restless heart started to jump. After all, she was aggrieved and could only move freely after Pest's death. The monsters I released are the magic projections of my inherent enchantment because you can attack them at will. This sentence made White Yaksha laugh. Then I won't hold back. Then the sun appeared. Chapter 665. Everything was over. Whether it was the attacking Infernal King or the most ancient Infernal King's clone, all of them had been killed. Shadora, the leader of the hierarchy, personally announced that they had defeated the attacking Infernal King and had also eliminated the most ancient Infernal King, Absolute Evil's clone. This undoubtedly strengthened the people who were afraid of the Infernal King and made them extremely happy. Their trust in Shadora also greatly increased. This made Mandela heave a sigh of relief. After today, Shadora's prestige as the leader of the hierarchy had been raised to a stable level. Salamandra did not have to worry about this anymore. As for No Name, although the people did not see the Infernal King being defeated by No Name, when the Infernal King was defeated, they saw that Shadora, Mandela, and the others were not with the Infernal King. Other than Salamandra, only No Name, who was not weaker than a powerhouse like White Yaksha, could have done it. In addition to Salamandra's publicity, the people knew that No Name had defeated the Infernal King. In addition, White Yaksha had personally admitted that No Name was the one who had trapped the two-headed dragons. That was why she had been able to eliminate the two-headed dragons in one blow. This made No Name even more famous. As a result, No Name changed from a nameless 7-digit community in the East District whose purpose was to defeat the Infernal King to a powerhouse who defeated the Infernal King. In this way, the reputation of No Name could be considered to have spread. More importantly, under the attack of the Infernal King and the god-level two-headed dragons, there were miraculously no deaths at the fire dragon birth ceremony. This undoubtedly made people very excited. After all, no matter which Infernal King attacked, it was impossible for there to be no casualties. Now, the people had something to brag about. For example, I experienced an Infernal King attack without any casualties, and so on. Of course, that was all in the future. After solving the problem of the Infernal King and the two-headed dragons, the fire dragon birth ceremony should continue. However, because the venue had been damaged a lot, the ceremony could not continue. As for the fire dragon's birth ceremony, it was only halfway done. Being unable to continue was undoubtedly a heart-wrenching matter. This was especially true for 16 Knights, Jyo Asuka, and Haruai Hikari. This was the first time they had seen such a grand ceremony in the Hakata world. Although it was interesting to face the Demon King, the fact that the ceremony couldn't continue made the three of them throw tantrums. However, White Yaksha stepped in to help. According to White Yaksha, she did not contribute much during the fire dragon birth ceremony and the Demon King's avatar's attack. Feeling apologetic, White Yaksha said that she would be responsible for repairing the damaged area of the ceremony. Although that was what he said, White Yaksha still borrowed the power of his community. After all, it would be a waste not to use it. After that, on the night of the Demon King's attack, this and Yes sent people to rush the repairs overnight. The next day, the entire venue was restored to its original state, as if nothing had happened. The fire dragon birth ceremony continued. In the various blessing competitions that were held after that, No Name, who had already made a name for themselves, became even more powerful. They participated in a large number of blessing competitions and won a large number of blessings. Even Ren released his servant, the demon star spirit Argel, which surprised Shadora and Mandela. All in all, No Name had earned a lot from this fire dragon's birth festival. A few days later, the fire dragon birth ceremony successfully ended. In front of Salamandra's temporary base during the fire dragon birth ceremony, Shadora and Mandela led Salamandra's group. In front of them were No Name and White Yaksha. Now that the fire dragon birth ceremony was over, it was time for White Yaksha to leave. As he wanted to try Wu Ming's teleportation portal, he chose to follow Wu Ming and the others back to the East District. "I'm really grateful for everyone's help in this fire dragon's birth ceremony," Shadora said with deep emotions as she bowed to everyone. Mandela and the other members of Salamandra didn't say anything, but they followed Shadora and bowed to No Name and White Yaksha. "Well, we've been slacking off, so there's no need to thank us." White Yaksha waved his hand. However, White Yaksha was a big shot after all, so he enjoyed Shadora's respect. "How could that be, Lord White Yaksha? Without you, our Salamandra wouldn't have been able to hold the fire dragon birth ceremony alone." Shadora shook her head and refuted White Yaksha's words. Then, White Yaksha nodded, shamelessly. This action made the 4 problem children look down on him. Then, as the leader of the community, Ren stepped forward and said some polite words. "Thank you for your care, everyone from Salamandra. We, No Name, also benefited a lot from the fire dragon birth ceremony. Now that the fire dragon birth ceremony is over, we should take our leave." However, there was still a trace of unwillingness in Ren's eyes. He really wanted to restore his alliance with Salamandra. No, they had always been allies, so it should be said that Salamandra had to restore their alliance unilaterally. It wasn't because he wanted to ride on someone's coattails or take advantage of them. Ren simply wanted to recreate the past of No Name. After all, if he really wanted to ride on someone's coattails, it should be Salamandra riding on the coattails of No Name. From Ren's point of view, finding his companions was one thing, finding his former allies was another. Wu Ming, who was standing behind Ren, put his hand on Ren's shoulder. Ren turned his head and saw Wu Ming shaking his head slightly. No matter what, No Name shouldn't be the first to suggest a reconciliation. After all, Salamandra was the first to unilaterally abandon the alliance. Ren nodded slightly. Then, Ren looked at Shadora. "Then we'll take our leave." After Ren finished speaking, a dark purple teleportation door appeared behind No Name and White Yaksha. At this moment, Shadora spoke. "Please wait." Everyone looked at Shadora and waited for her to speak. Then, Shadora looked at Mandela, who had closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at No Name with an apologetic and sincere gaze. "Everyone of No Name, I, as the leader of Salamandra, Shadora Telderek, resubmit an alliance application to No Name." Shadora's words made Ren's eyes light up slightly. Ren looked around and looked at the other No Name members. Wu Ming, Letitia, Black Rabbit, 16 Knights in Reverse, Joyuan Flying Bird, Kasuga Biao, and Lily. Everyone nodded at Ren and looked at him with encouragement and trust. The leader of the No Name community, Ren Russell, accepts the application from Salamandra. Then, Shadora and Ren shook hands, which meant that the alliance between Salamandra and No Name was formed again. Chapter 666. No Name Base in a Room. The dark purple portal opened and Wu Ming and the others walked out. The first to speak was Jiu Yuao. "Ah, we're finally back," Jiu Yuao complained as she sat on the sofa and leaned her back against it with a face full of enjoyment. For the past 2 days, they had been staying at the venue of the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony. Although the facilities were generally good, it was not their home. In short, it was not a comfortable place to stay. Although they had not been in No Name for long, Jiu Yuao had already begun to treat this place as her home. Haruai Hiroyuki was the same. She hugged San Mao and sat beside Jiu Yuao, stroking Sanmao's fur with a satisfied expression. I'm satisfied. This time I had a lot of fun. 16 Knights stretched and then found a sofa to sit down. His mood was the same as the other two problem children. You three became decadent in an instant. Aren't you afraid of Black Rabbit's preaching? Wu Ming joked, but he also found a sofa to sit down like the three problem children. Letitia, on the other hand, followed Wu Ming closely, befitting her identity as a maid. However, in the face of Wu Ming's teasing, the three problem children showed an expression of victory. Then, as the representative, 16 Knights spoke. It's just Black Rabbit, it has already been bought over by our spoils of war. Saying this, Wu Ming could not help but look at Black Rabbit. At this moment, the Black Rabbit was hugging a gift card and giggling foolishly. Black Rabbit did not even resist when White Yiksha was taking advantage of it. Did you guys give all the prizes you won from the gift competition at the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony to Black Rabbit? That's right, the reason why Black Rabbit became like this was because 16 Knights, Jiu Yuao, and Haruai Hiroyuki gave all the prizes they won from the gift competition to Black Rabbit. Of course. I don't need these things. Just take it as a favor. 16 Knights Reversal waved his hand naturally. Furthermore, this child's community has already given me the blessings I need. Other blessings are no longer of any use to me. Jiu Yufei said as he stroked the yellow elf that was lying on his leg. It's all thanks to you guys, Mir. By the way, Mir's the name I came up with for the child. Jiu Fei Niao said happily. The first half of the sentence was directed at Mir, while the second half was directed at the members of No Name. Mal. The yellow elf shouted happily. This little yellow fairy was the one that ancient flying bird had saved. Because Mir had sensed the danger, she lured the distant bird to the location of the greatest work of her community when the Demon King attacked. After passing the trial of the Mel community, Distant Bird successfully obtained a powerful gift that was suitable for him. Might. By the way, this child's community was the souls of the 130 children that were born in Hamel and lured away by the Pied Piper. After reincarnating, they became a group of elves with achievements and spiritual attributes. As for Mir, it was because the 130 children's elves had increased their spiritual attributes during the reincarnation process. Because of this, Mir was able to act alone. However, after knowing that this child's community was Rattenfanger, Wu Ming sighed at how small the world was. Pest's community was Hamel, and Mir's community was the Rat Catcher. There was a lot of fate between them. I only want to make friends. These blessings are of no use to me. In the end, Haruai Hiroyuki shook his head. Hearing the three problematic children's words, Wu Ming shrugged his shoulders. After all, he had given the reward from Salamandra, after defeating the Demon King to the Black Rabbit, who was the butler of No Name. At this time, Yaksha, who was quietly touching the Black Rabbit, made a strange sound. He, Black Rabbit's chest, he, slurp. After all, Black Rabbit wasn't really stupid. Because White Yaksha's movements were too big, he had already pulled Black Rabbit out of his beautiful fantasy about the future of No Name. Lord Yaksha. The Black Rabbit slapped Yaksha and sent him flying. Puff! Seeing Yaksha flying towards him, Wu Ming shook his head helplessly. Then he reached out and grabbed Yaksha's head. Be gentle, boy. Yaksha suggested. You really don't learn to be obedient, Yaksha. Wu Ming helplessly put Yaksha on the ground. He. This is the true meaning of life. This is the great spirit of sacrificing oneself for art. Sure enough, Yaksha was also a problematic child, or it should be said that he was a problematic BBA. Then I'm sorry, I'm not 16 Knights in reverse. Wu Ming shrugged his shoulders. Hey, what do you mean you're not 16 Knights in reverse? I've already become a derogatory term, you bastard. Although his tone was rough, 16 Knights in reverse still had a smile on his face. Shaking his head helplessly, Wu Ming stopped chatting with this group of problematic children. Ran, Black Rabbit, Lily, let's go arrange these gifts that we won from the Fire Dragon's birth ceremony in the community. Wu Ming said and looked at Ran, Black Rabbit, and Lily. Not only did the three problematic children give gifts, Ren also won a lot of more practical gifts. With these gifts, our No Name can be considered to have some assets. Black Rabbit hugged the gift card that stored the three problem children's contributions with a face full of happiness. As a moon rabbit whose motto was contribution, The Black Rabbit was extremely happy when she thought of contributing to the community. Although these bricks and tiles were not provided by her, it did not affect the Black Rabbit's mood. At this moment, Wu Ming suddenly froze. "Villo? What's wrong?" Ren looked at the stunned Wu Ming and asked in confusion. Then, Wu Ming looked at everyone seriously. "Sorry, everyone, it seems that I have to leave for a while." Eh? So sudden? Black Rabbit was a little surprised. "Did something happen?" Joyuan Fei Niao asked with concern. "Do you need help?" Haruhito Hikari asked with certainty, as if he would not allow Wu Ming to refuse. "I will follow you, master." Letitia, who had been following behind Wu Ming without making a sound, spoke up. "Letitia can, but I'm afraid the others can't, not even White Yaksha." Wu Ming shook his head. Wu Ming's words made everyone, including White Yaksha, frown. It seemed that Wu Ming's matter this time was not ordinary. "Then in the time you're not here, leave no name to us." 16 Knights Reversal suddenly jumped, came to Wu Ming's side, and patted him on the shoulder. "With me here, you can rest assured." 16 Knights Reversal bared his teeth. "Although I don't know what happened, we'll take care of no name, so you can rest assured." Ran, Black Rabbit, and Lily also nodded at Wu Ming. Seeing everyone's reaction, Wu Ming smiled. "Then, I'll leave no name to you, my friends." Chapter 667. Inside the Root. The huge dragon body was sleeping soundly on the platform inside the root, but the next moment, the dragon suddenly opened its eyes. The unique dragon aura of the root dragon spread to the surroundings, causing some changes in the root. "You're back," Wu Ming said in a daze as if he had just woken up. After Wu Ming greeted the members of No Name, he brought Letitia back to his room. After telling Letitia a few things, Wu Ming dispelled his spiritual body in front of her. After all, Wu Ming had been using his spiritual body for all his actions in the box court world, so he could dispel it at any time. Of course, after Wu Ming dispelled his spiritual body, his spirit returned to the root dragon's backup body inside the root. Wu Ming had also tried to dispel his spiritual body and return to his body, but the result was obviously a failure. The outside of his body was still blocked by the black origin mud, so his spirit could not return unless Wu Ming saw his body. Helpless, Wu Ming could only return to the root. However, one thing could be verified. Although the Demon King that attacked No Name stole Wu Ming's body, it did not affect Wu Ming's body at all. No, it should be said that it could not affect Wu Ming's body at all. Even Gidia had to rely on the self-destruction of the black origin mud to hurt Wu Ming, so how could a mere Demon King do anything to Wu Ming's body? After all, Collis was also in Wu Ming's body. Therefore, Wu Ming was not in a hurry to find his body. The reason why Wu Ming told No Name that he would be leaving for a while was because Gudatsi had used a heroic spirit summon on Wu Ming. Wu Ming was stunned at that time because he felt Gudatsi's summon. The holy relic was undoubtedly the holy grail that had transformed into the divine blade of salvation. However, Wu Ming didn't immediately respond to Gudatsi's summon because he needed to settle some matters here. As Wu Ming expected, Gudatsi should be at the 6th singularity. And now, Wu Ming was preparing to support Gudatsi and the others. However, Wu Ming remembered some information that Merlin had told Wu Ming when he was at the Uruk singularity. The 6th singularity was a little special. It was the singularity where King Arthur was located. In other words, we might meet Lily. On Wu Ming's huge dragon head, the pair of ruby-like dragon eyes flickered slightly. Although Wu Ming met Maeve first, strictly speaking, Artoria was Wu Ming's first love. However, because Artoria had to travel and fulfill her duties as a queen, Wu Ming didn't say anything and quietly became the king's knight. Because of Artoria's guilt towards Wu Ming, she deliberately transferred herself to Guinevere's side as Guinevere's personal guard. Did Wu Ming really not know what Artoria was thinking? It was nothing more than making up for what she owed him and Guinevere. After all, as a young girl, she couldn't satisfy her lover, and as a king, he couldn't satisfy his queen. Moreover, her lover and the queen were two people who liked each other. Wouldn't it be great to arrange them together? If Guinevere was pregnant, it would strengthen King Arthur's authority. After all, Artoria couldn't make Guinevere pregnant. Guinevere, who understood Artoria's thoughts, was happy to do so, but Wu Ming didn't take the initiative. In their opinion, Wu Ming was a stubborn person who wanted to be Artoria's knight. However, how could Wu Ming not see through Artoria and Guinevere's thoughts? He did it on purpose. It wasn't his style to be sneaky. If he wanted to do it, he would do it openly. Whether it was Artoria or Guinevere, Wu Ming wanted them all. Clenching fist, and this time, the singularity was an opportunity for him. However, before entering the singularity, Wu Ming needed to gather some information. Although it wasn't mature yet, Wu Ming could still get information about the singularity by using the Origin Dragon's ability. On Wu Ming's giant dragon head, the pair of ruby-like eyes were like a TV, projecting images. One moment it was a desert, the next it was a holy city, the next it was a rugged mountain, and the next it was a desolate wasteland. Wu Ming closed his eyes and opened them again. The scene in his eyes earlier was like an illusion. At this moment, it had disappeared without a trace. As expected, this singularity has a lot to do with Lily. Merlin, that bastard. He didn't explain it clearly. Wu Ming saw the nature of the singularity. The singularity wasn't caused by Gitia, but by Artoria. But this was also good. This singularity could be said to be without Gitia's interference, which made it easier for Wu Ming to act. However, it had been a long time, so he couldn't let his guard down. Dreams are beautiful, but reality is cruel. After becoming the Storm King, the undead king who walks the earth, and even the goddess, I'm afraid you have no human feelings anymore. Wu Ming's giant dragon head shook gently, as if denying Artoria's plan. It's not enough without a remonstrant. With that, Wu Ming slowly closed his eyes. The sixth singularity, on the ruins of the original Jerusalem, the new holy city stood there. In the palace, the Lion King, who rarely woke up from his sleep, came to the throne. Below him stood the Lion King's knights, the Knights of the Round Table. If Wu Ming was here, he would probably be surprised. These Knights of the Round Table were the knights in Wu Ming's memory. But this Lion King was different from the King Arthur in his memory. Compared to King Arthur, the Lion King was taller, had a more mature face, and a more mature chest. But even so, Wu Ming could still see that the current Lion King was the former King Arthur, Artoria. How is it? Haven't you found the whereabouts of the Villo? The Lion King's eyes exuded a holy light, and he asked the Knights of the Round Table below. The Black Knight's assistant, Agaroan, who was closest to the Lion King, took a step forward and respectfully bowed to the Lion King. I'm sorry, my king, but we still haven't found the whereabouts of the Villo. No wonder he was called Agaroan of Iron. His voice sounded as cold as steel. Hey, where did that guy go? He didn't even respond to the king's summons. That's annoying, Mordred said. He was wearing red armor, and he looked like a gangster. Agaroan frowned. He didn't know if it was because of Mordred's rude words or because Mordred was talking about the idol of the Knights of the Round Table. Gawain thought carefully about Mordred's words. Although there were only a few Knights of the Round Table between the thrones here, basically all of them had been summoned by the king's summons. They were not here because they had died on the battlefield, or were executed. It's not impossible that he wasn't summoned here. After all, Bird. Enough, Argyle of Iron interrupted Gawain. The Villo is not someone you can talk about. After Agaroan spoke, no one said anything. They quietly waited for the Lion King to speak. After a long time, continue to look for the Villo. At the same time, continue the saint selection. If there's anything urgent, go to Guinevere. She will tell me. After that, the Lion King got up and left. Farewell, my king. Behind him, the Knights of the Round Table respectfully said. However, in a place where no one could see, the Lion King sighed slightly. Wu Ming. Chapter 668. The sun shone on the ground that seemed to have been burned by flames, and the surroundings were filled with a barren aura. The ground was barren, and there was no sign of life. Even the trees were only left with black branches that seemed to have been burned, giving people a feeling that they would break with a touch. The black branches were like forgotten people, quietly standing on this barren land. A few black figures wandered among them, hidden by the shadows of the forest formed by the black branches. Suddenly, a bright blue light lit up in the forest, formed by the black branches, and a magic circle was automatically engraved on this barren land. The surrounding black figures slowly approached, and they could vaguely hear whispers that sounded like a spell. "Show yourself." However, they, who were no longer afraid of death, began to slowly approach this strange magic circle that might bring them food. Suddenly, the magic circle was engraved, and the light shone brightly, causing the few black figures hidden in the shadows to groan in pain, and at the same time, their figures were exposed. They were zombie-like creatures, and their faces were so thin that they were almost distorted. Filth mixed with blood wrapped around their bodies, and the black, smelly, and tattered cloth covered their bodies that were already riddled with holes and were as thin as firewood, as if it would not be strange if they died in the next moment. They, who were used to living in the dark, had a strong resistance to the sudden bright light. As they retreated, they used their arms to cover their faces with difficulty, as if their filthy bodies were not qualified to be exposed to the light. A few seconds later, the bright light disappeared, and the few figures returned to the shadows. This made them quiet down, but they did not put down the arms that covered their faces, as if they were afraid that the light would come again in the next moment. The sound of steel entered the ears of these zombie-like black figures. No, it was not steel, it was boots, the boots that they were familiar with, the boots that were worn by noble knights, made of steel. The sound of footsteps stepping on the ground. The black figures removed their arms and looked at the figure that appeared from the lit magic circle. It was a bright silver figure, and the silver-white armor and helmet covered the person's entire body, looking very holy. Their helmets also had protrusions that resembled dragon horns. Because of the helmet, their faces could not be seen clearly. However, this did not hinder the black shadows from killing the person inside the armor. The sound of the boots hitting the ground had terrified the shadows. They had become like this because they were wearing such boots. However, it was precisely because the young man was one of the perpetrators that the black shadows were filled with killing intent. On one hand, they feared the newcomer, but on the other hand, they hated the newcomer. They, who no longer cared about death, began to approach this sacred yet hateful figure. Wu Ming opened his ruby-like eyes from within the armor. "I'm not used to it." It had been a long time since Wu Ming looked through the helmet because his armor and helmet had long been lost in Camello. Whether it was the precious armor that he had given to Godotzi in the America Singularity, or the ordinary armor that he was wearing now that was condensed out of mana, it was not his real armor. After taking a deep breath, Wu Ming suddenly exhaled. "It's the smell of burning." Wu Ming looked around. When he saw that the horizon in the distance was also burned, he was not surprised. Although Wu Ming had seen the barren land through his authority in the route, when he experienced it himself, Wu Ming's brows furrowed even more. "What's wrong with this world?" Wu Ming sighed. His words were filled with doubts about why the land had become like this, and also about the black shadows around him that were filled with killing intent and wanted to attack him. After Wu Ming appeared from the heroic spirit summoning circle, he felt the killing intent around him. Maintaining the projection of his mental strength, he naturally saw the true faces of the surrounding black shadows that were filled with murderous intent towards him. They were humans, ordinary humans who had not died or been cursed. The reason why they had become zombie-like was because of hunger, Wu Ming guessed. Hunger had obliterated their human nature, leaving them with little appetite. Even their will to live had been obliterated. Because they had given up on struggling, they had no complaints even if they died now. To them, who were filled with fear of suicide, death was a release for them. There was no doubt that this was a contradiction. Wu Ming waved his hand, and a bright silver holy sword appeared from a golden ripple beside Wu Ming. Wu Ming grabbed the sword and pointed it downward. Then, he channeled his magic power and stabbed the ground. Boom, crack. A loud sound was heard. A small but deep fissure appeared on the ground. In the end, the black shadows who had not completely obliterated their will to live were terrified. It was not difficult for high-ranking knights to crack the ground with a single strike. However, not many people could create such a small but deep fissure like the one before them. They could not defeat such a knight. Otherwise they would not have become like this. The black shadows wanted to retreat, but Wu Ming would not allow it. Crack. Wu Ming gently turned the meteor silver that was inserted into the ground. Two cracks split from the small fissure that had already appeared, extending in an arc to both sides. In just a moment, these two cracks each extended half an arc and finally overlapped, forming a circle. And the black shadows just happened to be inside this circle. The black shadows who were frightened turned around and wanted to escape. But the moment they moved, the ground formed by the fissure suddenly sank. Clearly, Wu Ming had already used his magic to dig out the ground below. Anyone who dared to move it would definitely cause the ground to sink. The black shadows were silent. They were already trapped here. If they were to face the Silver Knight behind them, there was no doubt that they would die. Roar! The black shadows let out a desperate roar. But because they had not spoken for a long time, their roar sounded like the roar of a beast. Facing these zombie-like humans, Wu Ming did not use his sword. Instead, he sighed and shook his head. Then, he suddenly released his magic power. Boom! The magic power that was visible to the naked eye directly shook the black shadows that attacked Wu Ming. The black shadows were sent flying to the ground. Due to Silent Cry's deliberate actions, the black shadows were not injured. They were only sent flying. Looking at these black shadows extending toward him, Wu Ming felt despair and resentment. If Wu Ming was their enemy, it would be understandable to have such a degree of resentment. But Wu Ming had just arrived, so how could he be their enemy? In other words, these people regarded Wu Ming as their enemy. No, if they had an enemy, then they would definitely not be able to survive. In other words, they regarded him as the person who persecuted them. Wu Ming frowned. Then, Wu Ming looked at these humans. Tell me the information, and I will give you food. The black shadows were stunned. After a few seconds, they nodded in unison. Chapter 669. Logically speaking, Wu Ming shouldn't have any food, because the current Wu Ming basically didn't need to eat. Even if he needed to eat, Wu Ming could get the ingredients on the spot, so there was no need to store food at all. But because Wu Ming had a contract with Olga Marie, Wu Ming emptied a store in the burning Winterwood City because of Olga Marie. Although some of the food was consumed in the Winterwood City, there was still a lot left, so Wu Ming took it out and gave it to the refugees who were still considered human for the time being. At that time, Wu Ming only took some packaged food that could be stored for a long time, but for the refugees, as long as it was edible, they were already satisfied. In the end, Wu Ming got the information that the refugees were given food and water and staggered away. Wu Ming didn't say anything about saving them, because the hearts of these refugees were almost dead. Wu Ming had a way to save their bodies, but there was no way to save their hearts. And once their hearts were alive, then there was no need for Wu Ming to save them. So Wu Ming just gave them food and water, and a few words of advice, and let them leave. Wu Ming still remembered that when Wu Ming gave the refugees food, their eyes revealed a look of disbelief. Maybe in their eyes, Wu Ming just wanted to get some information and then kill them all. Because many of their companions were killed by the knights. The desire to live stimulated them, making them know that they would die later, but they still hoped to die later. So they told Wu Ming the information he wanted to know. But Wu Ming gave them food and water in the end. However, Wu Ming felt that the refugees were surprised by his identity, the questions, information, and the food and water he gave out. These things were incompatible with this era, and they were filled with a strange aura. After all, I'm not from this era. Shrugging his shoulders, Wu Ming no longer thought about the refugees. Instead, he reflected on the information they provided to Wu Ming. According to the refugees' intelligence, the Crusaders had obtained great strength and were constantly advancing towards the Holy Land of Jerusalem. Then, just as they were about to conquer Jerusalem, a desert suddenly appeared in the west, and the Crusaders suddenly weakened. Then, the Crusaders were chased down by the people of the Holy Land. This was undoubtedly good news for the refugees. At that time, a strong man who called himself the Lionheart King Charlie I suddenly appeared. With unprecedented strength, he annexed the original Crusader army and the Holy Land of Jerusalem in one fell swoop, directly unifying the other areas except for the desert in the west. However, Charles I, who was known as the Lionheart King, was more like a devil than a human. A devil that caused the surrounding residents to fear. Whether it was the unimaginable tyranny or the cruel means of toying with people's hearts, the residents suffered greatly. Although there were some who tried to resist, they failed in an instant. According to the refugee, he was fortunate enough to see the Lionheart King once. The Lionheart King's entire body was emitting a dark aura. Just one look at him was enough to make people feel despair. The refugees could only use two words to describe him: demon. Wu Ming could undoubtedly judge that the man who called himself the Lionheart King Charlie was a servant. However, this was completely different from the character of Charlie I that Wu Ming knew from history. Could it be that a servant with the Chaos Evil attribute had impersonated Charlie the First? Wu Ming had such doubts at that time. However, Wu Ming didn't have to continue to think about it, because the refugees told him that the Lionheart King Charlie was defeated. The strong man called the Lion King led the existence of the Knights of the Round Table. After a hard battle, they defeated the Lionheart King Charlie I, who was comparable to the demon, and ended the terrifying tyranny of the Lionheart King in a very short time. However, the rule of the Lionheart King who replaced the Lionheart King was not any better than the Lionheart King. The Lionheart King built a new holy city, Camelot, on the battered holy city of Jerusalem, and then drove out all the residents and completely blocked Camelot, and announced to the public that the holy selection would be held regularly, and the selected people would enter the holy city and start a carefree life. And these refugees who wandered in the wasteland and became inhuman did not participate in the holy selection, because the people who went to participate in the holy selection did not come back. There were a lot of people who went to participate in the holy selection. Although the refugees did not know the specific number, they knew that the holy city could not accommodate so many people. But none of those people came back. Thinking of this, Wu Ming sighed. Were they killed? After all, the people who went did not come back, and the holy city could not accommodate so many people. The only possibility was that they were massacred. Wu Ming's first reaction was disbelief, and then he began to have doubts. Merlin told Wu Ming that the Lion King was undoubtedly King Arthur Artoria, and the Knights of the Round Table were probably those people that Wu Ming was familiar with. If it was them, they would not have massacred, but if those people were not King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table that Wu Ming was familiar with, then it was not impossible for them to massacre the people who participated in the holy selection. The suspected servant named Lionheart was different from the original Lionheart, and it was hard to guarantee that King Arthur would not change. No, it should be said that there was already a change. Otherwise, why would he call himself the Lion King and not King Arthur? All in all, he still needed to investigate. Apart from this, the refugees had no other information. Wu Ming did not suspect that the refugees were hiding anything. Their eyes had already told Wu Ming that they had told him everything they knew. Moreover, even though these refugees were locals, they were still narrow-minded. Do you expect ordinary farmers to know state secrets? It was obviously unrealistic. So not only did Wu Ming need to find out about the Lion King, but he also needed to investigate the other forces, and most importantly, Wu Ming needed to find Gudatzi. After all, Wu Ming's main purpose was to help Gudatzi repair the singularity. Because Gudatzi had tried to summon Wu Ming was sure that Gudatzi and the others were in the singularity, but the specific location was difficult to find. Because of the incomplete authority link, Wu Ming could not search for too much information in the route. If he could achieve omniscience, then he was not far away from authority, and Wu Ming did not need to come here in person. He could have removed the singularity from the route. If he could do that, a mere Gidea would not be a problem. Shaking his head, Wu Ming threw the unrealistic thought out of his mind. Then, Wu Ming looked at the desert in the west, and then Wu Ming looked at the holy city in the east. Then, Wu Ming stepped forward and headed toward his chosen destination. Chapter 670. Wu Ming chose the direction of the east, and he decided to go directly to the Lion King. The biggest reason why he didn't go to the desert in the west was still unknown. Through the information provided by the refugees, Wu Ming could infer a lot of things. The Holy Grail was held by the Crusaders at the beginning, which was consistent with, they suddenly gained great power. Because they were not satisfied with their current power, the Crusaders made a gamble. They summoned a powerful servant. In the end, they lost the bet and lost everything. The servant betrayed them, and after snatching the Holy Grail, he summoned the entire desert here. After that, as the refugees said before, the Crusaders suddenly became weak, and then they were chased by the people of the Holy Land. Without the power of the Holy Grail, the Crusaders who couldn't beat Jerusalem became a paper tiger. After that, because the Holy Grail was in this era, some servants were summoned one after another. The Lionheart King Charlie was likely to be one of the servants summoned by nature. Due to an unknown secret, the Lionheart King did not become a brutal demon dweller like what was recorded in the history books. He annexed the Crusaders and the Holy Land, and fought against the servant in the desert. However, at this time, the Holy Grail summoned a new servant, the Lion King. The Lion King led the Knights of the Round Table to defeat the Lionheart King Charlie. The Lion King built a new holy city, Camelot, on the holy city of Jerusalem, which was affected by the attack on the Lionheart King and turned into ruins. The situation became like this now. The Lion King and the desert powerhouse were at the bottom of the pit. In Wu Ming's view, the servant summoned by the Crusaders was a pharaoh. Wu Ming could feel that the desert in the west was similar to the existence of an inherent enchantment, plus the ability to summon the entire desert was comparable to an inherent enchantment. Except for the pharaoh in Egypt, Wu Ming really couldn't think of anyone else who could have such an abnormal ability. After all, the pharaoh in Egypt was said to be a god. As a servant, the pharaoh was likely to be deified by this legend and have great power. The other party's information was completely unknown, and because of the enchantment, even if Wu Ming entered the desert, he could not effectively find Gudatsi. In short, Wu Ming was not prepared to get into trouble before he figured out who the owner of the desert was. Therefore, Wu Ming only had one choice left, and that was to go to the Lion King's side. Through Wu Ming's authority in the route, he knew that the singularity was on the verge of collapsing. If he continued to walk in a certain direction, he would find that there was no path left. This singularity was starting to break away from the timeline. It was like the singularity of the American continent. Beyond the singularity was a void. However, the final outcome of this singularity could be even worse. Compared to the American continent, which would become a new space independent of the timeline, this singularity would eventually collapse completely. The reason why the collapse of the human race in the singularity was so severe was actually because of the desert and the new holy city. The desert had the same effect as the fixed boundary. The fixed boundary interfered with the real world with a time limit, while the desert interfered with the real world without a time limit. The interference with the world had accelerated the collapse of the singularity. But even so, the singularity shouldn't have collapsed to this extent. So, the only reason left was the Lion King. Although Wu Ming did not get much information from the route, the collapse of the singularity still pointed to the Lion King. If I want to save this singularity, Tachika and the others will definitely go there. After all, if he wanted to restore humanity, he had to defeat the culprit who destroyed humanity. And now, the Lion King was the culprit. So, Wu Ming decided to wait for Gudatsi to arrive at the Lion King's side. At the same time, Wu Ming could also go and see what had happened to Artoria. Wu Ming took off his magical armor and put on a tattered cloak that he created using a high-tier item. Because the armor was not a noble artifact, it was dispensable to Wu Ming. So, Wu Ming cancelled the armor. And this way, he could also hide Wu Ming's identity as a Knight of the Round Table. Based on how the refugees treated the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming did not think that the Knights of the Round Table were very popular here. Just like that, Wu Ming pretended to be a refugee who wanted to go to the new holy city for the Holy Ascension. Stepping on the ground, Wu Ming walked toward the holy city step by step. However, the scenery along the way made Wu Ming frown. Along the way, although the surroundings were not as deserted as the place where Wu Ming had just arrived, the land that Wu Ming saw along the way was not much better. As if it had experienced a natural disaster, many places on the ground were cracked. The lack of water made Wu Ming unable to see any flowers or trees at all, except for a large piece of bare land. Wu Ming occasionally came across places that looked like villages, but there were still no signs of life there, which disappointed Wu Ming. None of the simple mud houses were intact. Basically, they were all so damaged that they were uninhabitable. There were no traces of human habitation around these houses. It was as if they had been abandoned for 100 years. There were some villages that seemed to have only been abandoned for a short period of time, but there were still no signs of life. I hope it's just my bad luck. Wu Ming comforted himself. Wu Ming felt uneasy that he could not meet anyone. If the humans in this singularity disappeared, it basically meant that there was no hope. The reason why Chaldea could save humanity, apart from Chaldea's uniqueness, was that there were humans in the singularity. It was because of such a small spark that Chaldea could turn this small spark into a big fire and finally let the fire of humanity envelop the entire earth. Apart from the humans at the beginning, Wu Ming didn't encounter any other living beings along the way. He didn't even see any living plants. Wu Ming did encounter a lot of monster-like beasts, but when they attacked Wu Ming, they were all killed by Wu Ming. Other than that, Wu Ming also found some mysterious craters. The craters were of different sizes. The largest had a diameter of a few kilometers, and the smallest had a diameter of tens of meters. These craters looked like meteorite craters, and there were traces of burns left behind. But how could there be so many meteorites falling? Standing at the edge of a crater, Wu Ming half squatted and touched the ground of the crater. If it's Lily, she really does have a relic that can create such a crater. The legendary weapon, the anchor that connected the two sides of the world, the Holy Lance Lungominiad. If it had been a legendary weapon, it would have been possible to create so many holes of different sizes. But why would Lily use the Holy Lance so often? Wu Ming wondered. Could it be that Artoria wanted to loosen the soil? How could that be? Wait. Wu Ming suddenly thought of an unbelievable idea. Then, Wu Ming ignored his hiding and flew up into the sky. Wu Ming flew to a high altitude and looked down. Then, Wu Ming's face changed. Chapter 671. Wu Ming landed from the sky with a gloomy face. His guess was right again. The giant pits of a few kilometers in size were distributed irregularly. In Wu Ming's view, it was likely that Artoria used the Holy Lance on Lionheart's troops. This was not a big problem, but the other pits that were not too big were quite big problems. Wu Ming looked down from the sky. The positions of these giant pits were suitable for building villages, and the size was completely suitable. So, the predecessor of these giant pits was a village distributed on this land. Because the Holy Lance continued to destroy the villages, the villagers who were lucky enough to survive had nowhere to go. They could only wander around, or go to the new holy city to participate in the holy selection to see if they could enter the holy city to live a good life. What? Why would the villagers go to the forces that destroyed their homes? Wasn't this obvious? Because the villagers who survived did not know the people who destroyed their homes in the new holy city. The light beam that destroyed the villages was probably just regarded as divine punishment. However, Wu Ming also encountered a lot of villages that had just begun to be abandoned. Why would these villagers abandon their villages and leave? Was it because there was no food, or because they were afraid of divine punishment, or because they were forced to leave? I lack information. Wu Ming shook his head. However, the limited information made Wu Ming understand why he could never meet humans. Although Wu Ming had previously guessed that the villagers on this land were eaten by the wild beasts that were quite powerful for ordinary people, this guess was now overturned. Camelot became the holy city. King Arthur became the Lion King. What happened in the end? What changed? Wu Ming looked in the direction of the holy city uneasily. After that, Wu Ming continued to move and set off in the direction of the holy city. Wu Ming found that the closer he got to the holy city, the fewer beasts he encountered before. Wu Ming even encountered a team of patrolling knights. Looking at the equipment of the knights, it was somewhat similar to the Knights of Camelot, but Wu Ming did not think that they were the Knights of Camelot. They were the Knights of the new holy city, Camelot, not the Camelot city of Great Britain Island. However, because Wu Ming hid, he was not discovered by the knights. Wu Ming was now more and more suspicious of the new holy city, so he decided to hide and see the situation first. After taking a slightly longer detour, Wu Ming disguised himself as a traveler who had come from a faraway place and was disturbed by the chaos of war. Because of the detour, Wu Ming was lucky to encounter a few humans. Fortunately, those humans also encountered Wu Ming. This was because they had encountered many strange beasts and monsters that Wu Ming had killed before. Wu Ming lent a helping hand and struggled to take care of the beast. In the end, he pretended to be seriously injured. He wanted to see if these humans still had hearts. Once again, it was fortunate that although these humans looked extremely thin and battered, they still retained their hearts. These humans were grateful to Wu Ming. After that, they said that they wanted to go to the holy city. If Wu Ming was willing, they could take care of the injured Wu Ming. Therefore, Wu Ming gladly joined the team. Wu Ming chatted with the leader of these people. The leader was constantly grateful to Wu Ming. After all, if it were not for Wu Ming, they would have been killed by the Soul Eater beast. The Soul Eater beast referred to the monster that Wu Ming killed. Such a monster was said to be the emissary of hell. It would kill humans and eat their souls, so it was called the Soul Eater beast. However, the Soul Eater beast was only a type of creature that was passed down in this area. Such a monster had never appeared before. After the strange creature that Wu Ming killed appeared, it was treated as a soul-eater beast. However, when Wu Ming said something like, "Aren't you afraid of being eaten?" the humans looked helpless. If it weren't for the fact that we can't survive, who would go to the holy city to participate in the saint selection? Being eaten or starving to death made no difference to them. It seemed that they also knew that those who went to participate in the saint selection did not return. It was precisely because they could not survive that they accepted dying on the way. They only went to the saint selection to try their luck. After all, they would starve to death if they did not gamble. As they gradually approached the holy city, Wu Ming and the others did not encounter any danger. However, Wu Ming obtained some information from the leader of these people. In the mountains of the distant north, the assassin order called the Old Man of the Mountain was still active. Wu Ming, who was familiar with the Holy Grail War, naturally knew of the existence of the Old Man of the Mountain because the assassin of the 7 classes in the Holy Grail War referred to the Old Man of the Mountain, Hassan Sabah. Normally, as long as the assassin class was summoned, the possibility of summoning Hassan was 99%. Because Hassan and the assassin class had a lot to do with each other, the name of this class was equivalent to a holy relic. Therefore, if one wanted to summon an assassin that was not Hassan, one could only use a special holy relic or method to do so. If one were to look at it from a normal perspective, Hassan was actually very strong. As for the organization of the Old Man of the Mountain, their leader of each generation was called Hassan Sabah. The Hassans shaved their faces and wore bone masks to hide their true identities. Each generation of Hassan mastered a skill that others could not imitate or learn. In the eyes of ordinary people and even magicians, they were extremely dangerous existences. However, the dangerous existences to humans were in an awkward position in the Holy Grail War. Because of their low basic ability value, the Hassans could hardly fight head-on with the other 6 classes. They could only rely on sneak attacks to their masters. Of course, because the Hassans had all kinds of strange noble phantoms, they were not completely defeated. After all, the noble phantoms were miraculous things that could turn the tide of defeat. Just like the assassin class card that Wu Ming once used, because the assassin class card stored the spiritual base of the 19th generation Hassan, different Hassan abilities would be obtained after using it according to different users. The Hassan that Wu Ming used was the 19th generation cursed wrist Hassan. One of his arms was the arm of the demon god, which was the arm of the curse that could crush people's hearts. Even if it was a servant, if they were accidentally hit by this attack, they would have to leave the stage. Anyway, all in all, Wu Ming obtained a piece of information. There was a suspected assassin order in the northern mountains, which was the Old Man of the Mountain Hassan Sabah. In this way, it could be regarded as a tripartite balance of forces. While thinking, Wu Ming found that they had arrived at their scheduled destination, the new holy city of Camelot. Chapter 672. A small number of refugees gathered in the open space in front of the holy city gate. There were about 100 or 200 of them. Among these 200 people, some of them had thin cloth placed beside them. Those were their beds. It seemed that many people had arrived here in advance, and it seemed that they had been living here for a long time. Fortunately, this place had become a singularity, and it was not so cold at night. Otherwise, these people would have frozen to death with just the thin cloth. However, Wu Ming was now thinking about one thing. Was he going to freeze here too? However, the heavens once again favored Wu Ming. The gate of the holy city opened. It seemed that Wu Ming had just arrived at the beginning of the holy ascension. The ability to double his luck in an instant was not for show. Seeing the gate of the holy city open, the refugees who had been waiting for a long time gathered together. Even the refugees who came with Wu Ming could not suppress the excitement in their hearts at this moment. They staggered into the crowd. Wu Ming naturally had to act more realistic, so he quickly walked toward the refugees. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming looked at the open gate of the holy city. A golden-haired man wearing pure white armor with a sword hanging from his waist walked out with a team of fully armed knights. The sword on the man's waist gave people the feeling of facing the sun. However, this comparison was correct because the sacred sword was the sister sword of King Arthur's sacred sword, Excalibur. It was called the Excalibur Victory Sword. The golden-haired man was none other than Gawain, the man who held the sword and was known as the Sun Knight. Wu Ming sighed. He had to admit that he could not greet an old friend he had not seen for a long time, and they might even become enemies in the future. Wu Ming once again felt helpless. Although becoming a servant gave heroes a chance to make up for their regrets, it was more of a helplessness brought about by the encounter across the timeline. Gawain, who had become a Lion King knight, was no longer the noble Sun Knight. Wu Ming guessed that the disappearance of the refugees who came to the Holy City for the Holy Ascension was related to Gawain. However, Gawain's next words confirmed Wu Ming's suspicions. Everyone, Gawain, will still be conducting the saint uplifting ceremony this time. Everyone, please settle down. Next, I will explain the things you need to take note of during the saint uplifting ceremony. Gawain waved his hand, and the knights standing behind Gawain began to move. In just a few seconds, the knights had surrounded Wu Ming's group of refugees. It looked like they were about to perform an important ceremony. However, this scene made Wu Ming frown involuntarily. In this way, if these knights wanted to do anything to these unarmed refugees who were in a sorry state due to their haste to travel would become fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. When the saint uplifting ceremony begins, the tallest tower in the holy city will emit holy light. At that time, the bodies of the selected people will glow. These selected people have the purest hearts. Next, they will have the right to enter the holy city and live a carefree life. As for those who are not selected, their impure hearts will make them lose the right to enter the holy city. That's the rule. Do you all understand? Although Gawain's last sentence was a question, the refugees did not make a sound, or rather, they did not dare to make a sound. And Gawain seemed to be familiar with the refugees' behavior of not daring to speak, so the question he asked just now was just a routine. Next, it was time for the saint uplifting ceremony. The saint uplifting ceremony begins. At Gawain's command, the tower in the center of the holy city of Camello emitted a light. This light made him look like a laser. He instantly arrived at the entrance of the holy city and shone on the refugees. The sudden change caused a commotion among the refugees. They began to check in a panic to see if their bodies were glowing, to see if they had obtained the right to enter the holy city and start a new life. However, most people's bodies were not glowing. There was not even the slightest change. However, most people discovered that there were only 3 or 4 people whose bodies were glowing. This frightened the refugees. There were so many of them, but only 3 or 4 of them were qualified to enter the holy city. Wasn't this saying that they were all dirty people on the inside? Those who had done many bad things frowned in dissatisfaction. When they heard that only those with pure hearts were qualified to enter the holy city, they no longer held any hope. They just wanted to try their luck. As for those who had not done any bad things and thought that they were pure but were not selected, they were devastated. This was the same as saying, you think you're a god, but in fact, you're not even a fart. It made people feel helpless, sad. However, Gawain did not show any surprise when he saw that there were only 3 or 4 people whose bodies were glowing. It was as if this was the number of people selected in each saint uplifting ceremony. Next, those who were not selected would be left to them to deal with. On Wu Ming's side, he was wearing a shabby cloak. His whole body was glowing, and he kept a distance from the people around him. However, Wu Ming was clearly not a human. He was clearly a ghost-like follower. How could he be selected? The mandatory condition to be selected by the light was that he was a human. In fact, when he saw the light emitted from the top of the tower, Wu Ming secretly used some means and tricks to capture part of the light. As Wu Ming expected, the light was emitted by the holy spear. Wu Ming's current spiritual base was indeed unable to face the holy spear head-on. However, Wu Ming still had a way to steal the light from those with pure hearts. It was because of this that Wu Ming's ghost was qualified to enter the holy city. The people around Wu Ming isolated Wu Ming. That was not Wu Ming's doing. After all, Wu Ming had to enter the holy city. It would be great if he could enter without causing a commotion. Therefore, Wu Ming did not need to make himself so conspicuous. The people around him only subconsciously distanced themselves from Wu Ming when they saw Wu Ming's body glowing. The selected Wu Ming was no longer like them. He was no longer a human like them. He was a real human. Therefore, the people around him subconsciously distanced themselves from the alien. The other selected people whose bodies began to glow were the same. The people around them subconsciously distanced themselves from them. It was also because the other selected people had the same experience as Wu Ming that Wu Ming did not do anything out of line. Unlike Wu Ming, who was unusually calm, the people who were alienated all looked uneasy and nervous. At this moment, Gawain spoke. Congratulations. You've been selected. You have the right to enter the holy city and start a new life. Then, Gawain opened up a path and pointed at the door behind him. Now, you may enter. However, the selected people, including Wu Ming, did not move. Or rather, other than Wu Ming, they did not know what to do. Gawain did not mind and waited quietly. Then, one of the selected people spoke. Can't I enter with my family? However, Gawain's reply was a cruel Gawain. Unfortunately, you can't. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.